And it seems that we are live at the moment. This is your brother Asar Imhotep with the Madhu Andela Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. I am here on this evening. What's today's date? Monday, March 16th. And, this wasn't a planned conversation today. So I don't expect, necessarily too many live, but I wanted to just have the conversation anyway. And so I decided last minute to do a show. So here we are. I want to thank everyone who is catching us live and who are in the chat. I see Amber and Unbiased Sports and Brother Chavez. So thank you all for joining me this evening. Peace, I see Brian Hess and Sister Maika and Juan Love. And I think I got everybody so far. So thank you all for for joining the conversation. And so this is a conversation that I actually have often. And with me being involved, in the community for like 20 years, 20 plus years, to be exact, you come across things that come in cycles. And, there's certain things that even our elders face that, of course, we will face, and I'm pretty sure that our children will face, in the existing in the kind of landscape that we do in modern times. And so, ultimately, and I'll probably do something a little bit more formal in the future, but ultimately, this discussion has to deal with the value that African scholars and African people bring to the various fields of academia, especially in fields of history, language and linguistics, philosophy, things of that nature, where it can be very politicized in terms of certain outcomes and arguments and things of that nature. And so those political issues often spill into the layperson's conversations who are maybe reading introductory texts, but aren't necessarily entrenched and engaged in the scholarship at the higher levels. And so when you get to these higher level discourses, you come to find out certain things about certain positions, arguments, and things to that nature that aren't necessarily reflective of reality, but more so people's own personal prejudices and things to that nature. And so this is especially true in the fields of Egyptology, because Egyptology arose as a discipline in the 1700s. And in the 1700s, there was, overt racism and slavery and things going on. And there was a lot written in the literature by Europeans about African people that, were not reflective of reality. And they would put these things in scientific journals, sociological journals, psych journals, and everything dealing with this notion that African people was impossible for African people to have created, quote unquote, great civilizations. And, coming out of slavery and us getting into the, educating ourselves and coming across information, from the get, we have been fighting against this notion that African people in general have no value. And then when you add that in terms of African scholars, that the African scholars have no value. And so with this being beat in the head of a lot of our, ancestors and colleagues and things coming from birth, when you get to academia and you start to do your own research and the like, there are some of us who believe that until certain white people validate certain arguments, then the arguments themselves are not true. And so, this permeates even until today. And I've seen these patterns. I've been involved in arguments in terms of the blackness of Egypt since the 90s, since the late 90s. And it was especially hard in the 90s because there was this big concerted effort to try to quell and discredit Afrocentricity by European scholars. And so some of those values and arguments from these Eurocentric scholars still permeate today in certain circles, and it slows down the progress of scholarship in a number of different fields. And so today's conversation, based on, a new reiteration of these old arguments that I've been involved in for 20 years, I wanted to kind of read. It's not a presentation per se, but I will be reading from a document. And this document was written by Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo, who many of you may know, who's one of my, many teachers and elders in scholarship when it comes to ancient Egypt and the rest of Black Africa. And so he is singly responsible for my going into the Chiluba Bantu language when I'm doing a lot of my comparisons with ancient Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, or New Kingdom, or Coptic. And so he, I kind of introduced him to the conscious community and his work because he writes in German and he writes in French. But he is from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He is a prince of royal lineage in there, and he's also, a world-renowned philosopher, linguist, and Egyptologist. And so we'll get into, some more details about his education when we read this document. But the document that I'm going to read from, I'm not going to read the whole document. I'm just going to go down and skip some parts, but I'm just going to make some commentary about certain things, and excuse me, certain things, that kind of pertain to what I was talking about earlier, and I hope that this helps to bring some insight into the nature of the conversations, because people think that certain African arguments are not in certain places because the arguments themselves are subpar, and that's not the case at all. The issue is that you have people who are in places of power in academia who just choose to shun information and try to quell the African voice. And we'll see how this is. So this is just one example that we can give many. And I could give you personal stories along these lines. And so, but the African school ultimately always, comes out on top because we're basing our stuff off of evidence and not off of, the emotions of it and the politicalness of everything. And so I introduce a lot of these scholars because this, especially when it comes to Egyptology, there's not many African Americans who engage on a professional level in Egyptology. It's literally maybe like two handfuls that you can say actually engages in actual scholarship. And now we're getting to the point where you're having African Americans get degrees in Egyptology. So there's quite a few of them across the country, but it's not many at all. So saying that to say that most of us who deal with for example, languages in Egyptology, in general, African languages in Egyptology, they speak or write in French. They come from the Francophone countries of Africa. And so since we're not in general introduced to the French language, most of that scholarship is absent from our conversations, unless, like within the case of Sheikh Anta Diop or Sheikh Anta Diop, that someone has translated the text into English. So in order to engage the African scholarship, you're going to have to learn French and German, for example, and in some rare cases, Portuguese. For certain Congo scholars and people like that exist in Malawi and Mozambique. And so once you learn, I encourage everyone to at least learn French and, get a group together. I have the Pimsleur's levels 1, 2, and 3 French. If anybody wants that, holler at me, so you can start learning, so you can start purchasing these books by these French speaking African scholars, and you can engage their texts directly. So with that said, the document that I'm going to read, it's an open document, so there's several places that you can probably find this on the net. However, it is written in French. And so instead of, because this is last minute, instead of doing a line by line translation like I would normally do, I just pressed on Google, translate from French, saying for the page, and just copy and pasted it and made a document. So some of the translation is not going to be right and exact, but I should be able to recognize it and correct it as we go. But in general, you'll get a gist. It's not too bad where you wouldn't get what is being said. So just want to give before I move on, want to say hello to Bot today, Sister Emmy Ket, Vyasa Gula, Zane Montego, Niger Valley Civilization, Lamar Pope, who's in the chat, Machona Nuno, Teal G841, Brother Sheffron, and I think I shouted out Juan already, and the Black Star. So I hope I got everyone in the chat. So I appreciate you all for, and I see Lakeisha Dunn, I am King Sosa, and Jaga Davis. Peace to all of y'all. So I will continue. So hopefully everyone, who is just joining is getting a gist of what I have been talking about thus far. So, we're just going to get into it. So actually I need to open the document. So give me a second because I forgot I restarted this computer. So now I need to go back into files. Go into downloads, boom, 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 my docs, and Ancient Egyptian. And open with, let's get Adobe Acrobat. So hang on just for 1 sec. Okay, so now we can get busy. So let me share my screen. So boom. Let me click out of there. So let me hit that. Okay, I'm just going to wait a second, make sure I can see it on the other computer. So it seems to be up. Oop, nope. Let me get back to what I was doing. I'm sorry, there's a way to make this full screen, and I forgot how to do it on this device. There we go. Okay. Hold on. All righty. Okay. So as I stated earlier, when we're talking about, this concept of African agency and the kind of vitriol that African scholars face when they have the audacity to write about their own cultures and their own history and come to different conclusions than European scholars who study African people. And so, as I mentioned before, there's a scholar by the name of Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo, and he wrote an open letter. So what we're about to read is aspects of this open letter to this conference, to the committee of this 10th annual, Congress for Egyptology, I think way back in 2007 and 2008. So it's the 10th International Congress of Egyptologists. So we see the original title. So just in case you want to look this up yourself and follow it, this is the original title at the top. And so, but I have it translated, here at the bottom, well, here at the semi-top, So now, so this is a thing, it's called Ancient Egyptian, a Bantu language. Is the question less original than ancient Egypt and Greece? So subtitled, a protest against the discrimination of Black Africa by the organizing committee of the 10th International Congress of Egyptologists. And so, again, this was in 2008. So he starts off the conversation asking the question, what does the Congress of International Association of Egyptologists mean? If the 10th, International Congress was a Congress of the Association of European Egyptologists, I would not have protested. If the 10th, International Congress was a Congress of the Association of Western Egyptologists, I would not have protested. If the 10th International Congress was a Congress of the Association of Leucoderm, red or white Egyptologists, I would not have protested either. I have no right to disturb Europeans, Westerners, or leucoderms when they want to meet with each other to imagine and conjecture their history. The AIE Congress is an international, intercultural, and intercontinental and interracial Congress. And so he's setting us up right now and saying, in terms of what he's going to be discussing. So we know right now that he's protesting, and we'll get to see why he's protesting. So he says racial discrimination of blacks at the level of the scientific committee. As this is a world congress of an association bringing together Asian, American, Australian, European, and African scientists, Africa should not be missed within the committee, which retains themes. Given the global nature of this Congress, bringing together scientists or Lucaderm scientists or whites, and in a lot of Mubabinge Bilolo's literature, when he refers to white people, he calls them leucoderms. And so continuing, xenoderms or yellow, basane or melanoderms or negros in the Aristotelian sense of negro nations. Melanodermal or black scientists cannot be absent from the scientific committee and in the other committees. So this is a international committee of Egyptologists, but there are no African people, on any of the committees or who make any kind of decisions and things of that nature. And so this plays a big role. So he says, it is necessary, dear colleagues, that a Theophilo Benga, a Mubabinge Bilolo, an Om Ndiji, Malana Karanga, Gilbert Ingo, Malefi Asante, Alan ANCIEN can come and kneel before their white colleagues. He's asking the question, is it necessary that these people can come and kneel before their white colleagues in order to be accepted in these commissions or invited to give an opening conference or during plenary sessions? And so do we have to come and beg y'all to be on these panels? And all of these individuals are way more educated than a lot of these Egyptologists that we'll find in these different arenas. So he says the Negro world in general, the Negro world in general and Black Africa in particular are scandalized by the monopolization of the 10th International Egyptian Congress by European Egyptologists, and especially by the attempt to discriminate against Black Africa by simply refusing themes that promise to be absolutely revolutionary. This is why I come on behalf of the African scientific community, or KAME, to demand that justice be done. So what he's saying here is that what they will do, instead of having to engage with African scientists, is that what they'll do is try to just simply to refuse their arguments. Remember that his presentation is about the Bantu character, of the ancient Egyptian language. And so the the call for papers was for new and refreshing, ideas pertaining to ancient Egyptian language and culture or history. So they're looking for new things. They're looking for revolutionary scholarship. And so when the Africans bring that revolutionary scholarship, remember that they haven't read the stuff. All you're reading are the abstracts. And so they don't have any details about what the scholarship is. But for some reason, all of the African scholars are rejected. And then all of the European scholars for this international scholarship, scholastic conference, are only accepted. And so this brings this brings up certain histories and memories, in terms of racism. But this is what they do. And so they can't validate African scholars, because now, at least according to their mind, it puts them on the same playing field. Because when you come to these conferences, see, this is what a lot of people don't know. In these major conferences, what they do is that they take the papers, if they're not designated for some other publication, what they do is they take the papers and publish them under the conference plenary. You'll see books written later that are just papers from conferences. And so, anybody in the Philadelphia area, if you go to the library, the University of Pennsylvania museum library and go into the Egyptology section, you'll see tons and tons of books that are nothing but papers that were presented at conferences. And so what happens is if you accept these African scholars' papers, then you have to put them in the text. And so they, you have these persons with these prejudices and biases that refuse to do that. And so if anybody, for example, knows the story about like how many times Cheikh Anta Diop had to write his PhD dissertations because of the discrimination in France, saying against African scholars, you'll know more about this. So I'll just continue. So the statistics, section 3, the statistics of the scientific committee. So he said so at this time, this is after the abstracts have been submitted and they know that the conference is going down and who's going to be in it and what they're going to be talking about. So he does a statistical analysis and tells you where all the people are coming from. So from the UK is 3 scholars. From France is 3. Oh, excuse me. This is just the who makes up the scientific committee. So 3 from UK, 3 from France, 2 from Germany, 1 from Italy, 1 from the United States, and 1 from Egypt. Which is strange, since you would think that you would have more representatives actually from Egypt, on this scientific committee, but that's not the case. So when it comes to continental representation, you have 10 from Europe, plus the Greek organizers. You have 1 from North America. You have 0 from South America. You have 0 from Asia. You have 1 from North Africa and Egypt, but you have 0 from Africa, south of Aswan. And so it is questionable, the diversity of perspectives and presentations, there, because Africa has a ton of Egyptologists, and you would think even from Egypt that you would have more. And then it says representation by sex. There is 100% men. There are 0 women. Representation by color, 100% white, 0 Asians or yellow, 0 black folks. He says, while noting the overrepresentation of certain countries such as France, England, and Germany in these committees, I also note that underrepresentation, even in the absence of our female colleagues in this strategic committee. What is the use of speculating on the Ma'at when the black race is so openly discriminated against? I remind you that the Pope of Western philosophy and science, the great philosopher Aristotle, places the ancient Egyptians at the head of the Negro nations, or to use his expression, at the head of the black nations. So after he's given the statistics on the committee, so you know that the committee is made up of 100% white males for the most part, with the exception of the one, basically Arab, Egyptian, coming out of Egypt in terms of the conference. So now Mubabinge Bilolo's about to kind of flex and stunt on the committee members right here. So he asks the question, how many colleagues do we have in all of these committees who have the scientific skills in the Nile Valley and Greece equal to or greater than the skills of Dr. Theophile Binga or Bilolo? So he's putting out there, which one of y'all are more educated than Theophile Binga or Bilolo? We are the product of better schools of Africa and the better schools of Europe. Africans have a dual background, African and Western. Westerners have only one formation. They are very low compared to Africans. And so if we want to use the dual consciousness of W.B. Du Bois, in many respects, Bilolo is saying something similar here. We have 2 levels of education. The indigenous education that you get by existing as an African person. And then you have the education that you get from matriculating from the finest of European schools. And so it is the absence of being able to speak African languages natively. It is the absence of understanding African cultures natively that puts a handicap on Egyptologists who go to universities and take a few classes and think they can understand African culture. So now he continues. He says, do not confuse the economic political crisis fueled by the arms of the West with Black African scientific skills. Read the biography of Cheikh Anta Diop. Remember that Cheikh Anta Diop was a physicist and chemist. He had 2 degrees in chemistry in terms of his master's. And then I think he got his PhD in anthropology. But Cheikh Anta Diop is a physicist and a chemist who mastered linguistics, who also mastered Egyptology, Coptology, and the study of Semitic languages and cultures. And so, as Bilolo states after this, he is very well trained. And so he says, read the biography of Theophilo Benga. Again, you will notice that he is a scientist with a rare training and a rare capacity for research and production. Like, y'all need to read up on Theophilo Benga. That's all he does is stay in school and train. He says, let me remind you or inform you that with regard to the scientific skills necessary for a scientific approach to Pharaonic Egypt, I am a part of the scientific cream of our time. After more than 25 years of university training, during which I had to study in 4 phases, several disciplines. So this is Mubabinge Bilolo talking about his university training. Philosophy, anthropology, sociology, African religions, theology, and human sciences. So remember, he says 4 phases of education. Phase 2, philosophy, social sciences, and fundamental theology. Phase 3, Egyptology, ethnology, Africanism, and religious studies. Phase 4, political science, sociology, infrastructure, economics, and environmental management. So he continues, I am trained by the best specialists in African and Bantu linguistics, the late Professor Dr. Kadima Kamuleta, by the best specialists in African oral literature, Professor Mufuta Kabimba, and the best specialists in African religions. And so you got to keep this in mind. When you go to get your PhD and your master's, you're trained by certain specialists. These are the people on your dissertation committees. You know, you have some core classes, and then for the most part, you are guided by specialists in the league. So what he's saying here, like, you know, so here's a name if you want to look him up, you know, in terms of African linguistics, especially Bantu languages and cultures, Dr. Kadima Kamuleta. And when it comes to African oral literature, Mufuta Kabimba. So there's a wide range of training, but let's keep going. I taught Pharaonic religion and other African religions, 1978, 1979. It's actually 2 years, as well as Eastern religions, African philosophy, philosophical hermeneutics, and philosophy of languages. Ptahhotep, Kagimni, Wittgenstein, Austin, or Austin, Serlet, Ricoeur, Heidegger, Gadamer, etc. I taught the concept of nature of Akhenaten, Plato, Aristotle, Augustinus, Descartes, Kant, Hegel, Edgar, Morin, etc. before coming to Europe, and I repeat, already during the academic year 78 and 79. Today is 2008, so 30 years later. I do not believe that there are more than 5 living Egyptologists with similar training. Add to this intercultural and intercontinental and interracial competence and experience. mastering more than 3 Bantu African languages, adopting the Western classification, but really is more than 10 Bantu languages, alongside German, French, and English languages, to which must be added the ancient Egyptian, Coptic, ancient Greek, and notions of biblical Hebrew, elementary Italian. And I'm surprised to note that European colleagues know in advance the impact of this knowledge in the head of an individual on the study of Chikam, or of the ancient Egyptian language, that is. So he's saying, I speak 10 African languages. I also speak German, French, and English. Not only that, I know Egyptian and Coptic. I know Greek. I know biblical Hebrew and some elementary Italian. So he is an individual who not only studied linguistics, but is a polyglot himself. And not only that, in terms of because he's really known in terms of African and European philosophy and ancient Egyptian and Egyptology and ancient Egyptian studies. So his PhD was in Egyptology and philosophy. So on purely formal level, this degree of interdisciplinarity in knowledge of ancient and modern languages is a rarity within the world community of Egyptologists. Am I wrong? To speak Egyptian, my fellow man, does not yet exist within the International Association of Egyptologists. So he's saying, who among y'all can boost that you speak 10 African languages plus these European languages, knows Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, and can write and speak, not formally, of course, but at least be able to write and study ancient Egyptian and Coptic. There's not many, if at all any. And so, in short, there is nobody among all of my Western colleagues who has the linguistic skills who can allow him to know if the subject of Chikam and Chiena Intu can advance linguistic research or not. So, as you know, if you have read my book, Aluja Volume 2, you know that I took the title of Chiena Intu from Mubabinge Bilolo and applied it to Negro Egyptian, because ultimately that's kind of what he's referring to. But I applied it in a more narrow sense than Mubabinge Bilolo does. So now, which one of y'all, are qualified enough to make the argument that, because remember, he's arguing. Remember, he submitted an abstract on ancient Egyptian and Bantu languages, or ancient Egyptian as a Bantu language. So now he's given the criterion of the original theme. You say that the theme ancient Egyptian Bantu language provisional results of the Chiluba translation project of the Egyptisch, this is German, so I don't do German too well, but the Egyptisch Handwörterbuch, Berlin, 1921, from Ehrman and Grabhall. And so this was a 5-volume handwritten dictionary that took about 50 years to complete. And so Mubabinge Bilolo has been involved in finding the cognates that you find in the Wörterbuch in his own native Chiluba language. And he has a preliminary book towards a Chikam, Coptic, and Chiluba dictionary. So he said, is it possible that I am underinformed about the existence of dictionaries, of ancient dictionaries, or ancient Egyptian dictionaries in Zulu, and ancient Egyptian in Luba, or ancient Egyptian in Congo? So what he's saying here is that, remember, the criterions for this like new, refreshing, and revolutionary research. But he's saying, are y'all familiar with any kind of dictionary in ancient Egyptian and Zulu, or ancient Egyptian in Luba, and ancient Egyptian in Congo? Is that the standard now, that y'all saying that the the concept of an ancient Egyptian and Luba dictionary is not new, refreshing, and revolutionary. So is there a more original theme in Egyptology than the translation of the Wartabush by Ehrman and Grappal as a presentation for the complete translation of the Wartabal in a language of a Bantu linguistic family? Is there a more original theme than the presentation of provisional results of an instrument translation project par excellence of the work of any Egyptologist, namely the Wartabush? Who is there? Who is this other Lucaderm, or who is this other white colleague who knows the Bantu languages, who speaks them, who has already translated Ehrman and Grandpa Wartabush in Kikongo, Bassa, Zulu, Luba, and who can present the conclusions of his translation from the Wartabush in grammar, transcription, and translation? Who is this white man? Who can replace me at Congress? This work has never been done, and none of the Western colleagues currently alive can do it. So he's saying that what I'm doing is original, groundbreaking work, and there's none of you who are qualified to even do this work. So what are y'all presenting that is more original than what these African scholars in terms of the relationship between Egyptian and Bantu? And there's a reason why you will see when we present this information to certain folks that they try to disown it, discredit it without even reviewing the text, without even reviewing the evidence. They'll do this because we're still continuing the battle of an African Egypt, a Black African Egypt. So once you tie ancient Egyptian to Chibantu, it's a wrap. You're going to have a hard time trying to argue that these benevolent European dark Hamites came all the way into Central Africa and created a language and culture that is on par with ancient Egyptian and things of this nature. And so it is just this resistance. It is a systematic resistance to a Black Africa, excuse me, a Black Egypt, a Black ancient Egypt to be more exact. So the proposed theme operates an epistemological break in Egyptology and linguistics. Given the rarity of Egyptologists who master 2 or 3 African languages in the Nile Valley or at the sources of the Nile, why did the 10th International Congress refuse to retain the proposed project in the philology section? It is not a pure project. It is a question of presenting the results of part of the work accomplished to the colleagues of all continents. So, you know, I'm not sure how many people actually present at conferences, but when you present at conferences, you don't have to present the full and entire work. You can even present information that is concerning research that is ongoing, and you can research, you can present the preliminary efforts of your research so that you can get feedback from your colleagues. So this is what happens all of the time, you know, at international conferences or just conferences in general. So I'm gonna continue. And it is precisely this epistemological revolution, this emergence of the Black Champollion, that, and he's referencing himself here, because he's arguing that he is one of the decipherers of the relationship between Egyptian and Bantu in a very real way, which technically we had to give it up to Mubabinge before him, but I understand in the context of what he is saying, and because I know certain of Mubabinge Bilolo's arguments. So now, do you think that the theme of Greece and Egypt in antiquity, on which there are already 3,000 publications, is more original and responds better to the demand? So he's putting it in quotes here because this was actually in the call for papers. He said, so in quotes, the demand for original and scholarly research that advance our Egyptological knowledge. So let's rewind this back. So from the looks of what was accepted, it was just every day as usual. So Greece and Egypt. And the reason why you find a lot of Egyptologists publishing in this arena is because there's a lot more, documents concerning the relationship between, Greece and Egypt in the later times, especially in the formation of Coptic and things of that nature, and of Roman times. So it's easier for, Egyptologists to gain information from that late period than it is from earlier period. But there's a ton of information on this stuff already, to the point where it's like, people are researching, just very minor, things that seem insignificant. Like, I have a book on ancient Egyptian turtles, and representation in art. Not saying that that's not significant. That may that some information from that text may be very valuable to me in the future. But I'm just saying, like, this is the state in which, Egyptological literature is in nowadays. So there's already 3,000 publications on the relationship between Greece and Egypt. But how many of you, are familiar with the relationship between Central Africa and Egypt? And so, when there's not much. And so, this is groundbreaking work, and this is original work. We know, because Mubabinge Bilolo is one of those, it's really him, Omindiji, Theophilo Benga, as the kind of that first wave, the first founders, saying of this Bantu ancient Egyptian relations in terms of scholarship. So I'll continue. So let me just read it over again. Do you think that the theme of Greece and Egypt in antiquity, on which there are already more than 3,000 publications, is more original and responds better to the demand for original and scholarly research that advance our Egyptological knowledge? That the theme of the ancient Egyptian and the Bantu linguistic family, on which, apart from the works of Theophilo Benga, Alan Antolin, Ngom, and Omindiji, is there nothing yet? So these are the preliminary scholars who was writing on these, on the Bantu relations with Egyptian. Have you ever seen in a library ancient Egyptian and Bantu language dictionary? Bilolo is going to be the first person to ever compile such a thing. So there's no more groundbreaking. He is a groundbreaking in this, a groundbreaker in this. And I'm just looking to the side. I'm trying not to pay attention too much to the chat, but I want to say thank you to Picasso for your donation. Appreciate you listening in. And anybody who's new to the conversation, I thank you all for listening in. And I will just continue. So I'll continue. So section 6, criterion of the theme that can advance knowledge about Egypt. So on the basis of what science, what revelation can you predict or deduce that the research results on the ancient Egyptian and the languages of Central Africa will not advance our Egyptological knowledge? What are the races that are contained in this hour research on Chikam or Jikima and other languages of the Nile Valley does not, excuse me, I messed that all up. What are the races that are contained in this hour? And this is actually supposed to be in this one of these hours here. So research on Chikam or Chikame or Jikama and the other languages of the Nile Valley does not only advance our Egyptian knowledge, but it revolutionizes Egyptology, African linguistics, Grecology, and Orientology. They revolutionize grammar, transcription, translation, interpretation, and vocalization. So what he's saying here is that, doing research in Bantu advances Egyptological research in all of these areas in terms of grammar, transcription, translation, interpretation, and vocalization. And this is something that I have proved in a number of my texts. And you'll see more of that in Aluja Volume 2, China into Religion and Philosophy. And so, you know, without the help of Bantu, I would not be able to get to the heart of a lot of these ancient Egyptian concepts, because it is something in the Bantu languages and cultures that illuminates so much of ancient Kemet. And there's a reason why, you know, for example, you know, I was able to discover the monosyllabic agglutinative nature of the ancient Egyptian language, and why I can isolate roots in Egyptian because of their correspondences in Bantu languages. And so the Bantu languages revealed the class nature of the ancient Egyptian. So in Bantu, you have noun classes. In Egyptian, you have noun classes attached to the words, and they are reflected even in the classifier scripts, which are known as determinatives in most Egyptological literature. All of this is being revealed through the relationship between Bantu and Egyptian, which we call Chikam. So, and I want to thank you too, Ivan. Please forgive me for mispronouncing this name, but Vasquez Telez. Probably leave a voice message somewhere and so that I can pronounce that correctly. But I appreciate your patronage in the super chat. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm gonna continue. What a lack of curiosity when a colleague tells you that I have the impression that the ancient Egyptian is not a dead language and that is still spoken today. I noticed that the basic vocabulary is of a bewildering vitality in the Bantu language family. And so he's talking about himself now. So he says, you know, when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I have the impression that the ancient Egyptian is not a dead language and that it is still spoken today, I noticed that the basic vocabulary is of a bewildering vitality in the Bantu linguistic family. And then you answer him that you have more original themes on Egypt and Greece. You know, who are we laughing at here? So a colleague comes to you and says that I can demonstrate to you that the ancient Egyptian language is still spoken today. And it is found amongst these Bantu speaking people in Central Africa. But your response is that we have more original research on themes of Greece and Egypt. And so he's saying that this is laughable. A truly scientific committee, selection committee would have replied, in quotes now, it's incredible, dear colleague. Bring us proof. We are very curious. So, you know, having these scientific backgrounds, we understand that this is new groundbreaking work and you might be hesitant. But if you were truly a scientist, you would say, well, send us something first. We are interested and we want to see what you are bringing to the table. But that's not what they do. They look at the title of the presentation and they automatically dismiss it as if they have done any work in this field. So that's why he was bringing up those qualifications and stuff earlier. Which one of y'all in this scientific committee of 100% white men saved the one Egyptian? So I'll just say the 98 or 99%, you know, of men saved the Egyptian, of white men. Which one of y'all have mastered 10 African languages and Egyptian and Coptic and no linguistics that y'all can tell me that, you know, this isn't compelling, that y'all have done this work. And so y'all have enough information that y'all can just dismiss a priori a work of this magnitude. So this is what he's saying. So in all sincerity, some of our colleagues do not like Africa. They don't like ancient Egypt. They are there to distort the sources and even to remove the evidence. They hate Negroes or blacks, Arabs and Semites. When I speak of pharaonic philosophy, Westerners get angry. When I recall that Plotinus is an Egyptian, Western philosophers shout, "To arms against Bilolo." They do not share the premises of our Western thought. He is deeply African. And then he's, again, he writes in German, so I don't know German like that. Ist Deutsch, Deutsch Afrikaner. When Assmann, this is John Assmann, Egyptologist, world-renowned Egyptologist, recalls the impact of Egyptian thought on Western thought, or speaks of Moses the Egyptian, we start to curse. Let us not forget the reactions and coalitions against the colleague of Martin Bernal. So remember what I was saying earlier about in the 90s, how we was fighting very hard against this systematic onslaught against Afrocentricity. And they went after Martin Bernal because Martin Bernal, not being an African, was ultimately supporting the major things that the African-centered scholars have been saying all along. So because Martin Bernal was white and the grandson of a renowned Egyptologist, Williams Flanders Petrie, and he had the credentials, they did not like that at all. So the same vitriol that the Afrocentrists got, Martin Bernal got. So just some back story to that. So I'll just read it again. When Assmann recalls the impact of Egyptian thought on Western thought, or speaks of Moses the Egyptian, we start to curse. Let us not forget the reactions and coalitions against our colleague Martin Bernal after the publication of his Black Athena. If someone does not like the Negroes or the blacks, let him go study Grecology, Francoology, or Germanology, or Britannology, or Occidentology, but he cannot. The drama is that the majority that I know, that I frequent, fails to mobilize to thwart this Negrophobia or Afrophobia of their colleagues. So he's talking about the I'll just use his term, the Negrophobia, found in these Western traditions, in these schools or whatnot. So remember, he's trained in these schools. He knows this stuff firsthand. He knows these people firsthand. So he's had to deal with them for a number of years. So, going to point number 7, that Chicam has not vanished. And so he says, most of the colleagues trained by lying scholars believe that the ancient Egyptian disappeared around the 5th century. They confuse the end of a writing or the death of people able to read writing with the death of a spoken language and the oral tradition. And so I haven't even gotten to certain oral traditions in Central Africa. I'm saving that for later. But I did at least deal with one group in Central East Africa, the Nilotic speaking Collagen folks. And so, we'll deal with that in another time. When we spoke ancient Egyptian, we spoke Greek, Berber, Persian, Arabic, Latin, etc. All these languages are still spoken, with transformations, of course, but they do speak. The proof is that the Greek organizers speak Greek. It's the new Greek. It is different, but it's still identifiable as Greek. So what they're saying is that, you won't recognize the modern versions of the language versus the older ones. One, because they don't understand it to that high degree just yet, in terms of vocalization and things of that nature. But if you was to try to speak modern English to ancient English, or old, English, you have middle, English, but old English, and not to drink for all you alcoholics. The old English, you would not be able to understand old English. It sounds totally different. And so, but luckily you have the writings that, we can go back and read old English, and it'll make some sense to us. So I'll continue. It is not possible that a language which was spoken at the beginning of the Roman era by more than 7 million people and understood up to Meroe, therefore up to Uganda and the south of Chad, could disappear, be volatilized without leaving traces, except for the Coptic on the whole continent. So think about this. You have, millions of native Egyptian speakers and people who spoke Egyptian around Egypt. And then all of a sudden, the Arabs come, and then there's no trace of the language in anywhere in Africa. So so we'll continue. Modern Chicam exists in the same way as Greek, Arab, Persian, or modern Berber. Egyptology must turn to the sources of the now. A contrary approach falls under the register of scientific mysticism. Anti-Negrism is ridiculous and goes nowhere. Because remember, if any of y'all are familiar with the Egyptological literature, everywhere they go, they're trying to compare the ancient Egyptian with the Semitic languages. They're trying to make the argument that Egyptian is close to Semitic and Berber. And anyone who has done any serious comparisons of ancient Egyptian and Berber know that, and Berber as in any of the Semitic languages, know that it is nowhere close to these languages. But they keep trying to find connections. And they find some similar words and believe that they have enough to make a connection. And this is very problematic, as it regards science and how science is done. But we'll deal with that in the near future. And so he says his provisional results from at least up to 2008, when this was going on. He says the provisional results of the translation of the dictionary by Ehrman and Grappall led me to this observation. So this is before Jean-Claude Mboli. And Jean-Claude Mboli only recently heard of Mubabinge Bilolo. And I know this for a fact because I introduced them to. And so neither have heard of any one of them. So I introduced Mboli to Bilolo and his works, and Bilolo to Mboli. And Bilolo has recently got Bilolo has recently got Mboli's work. And so some things is happening behind the scenes in terms of this type of literature. But so I'm saying that to say that Mboli came to the same conclusions as Bilolo, that in which I'm about to read now. So this is two independent scholars, and Jean-Claude Mboli does not he's not a native speaker of any Bantu language. And so this isn't Bantu bias on the side of Mboli. So because his native language is Asongo and Nzande. So one of his parents speaks one of those languages, and they were both taught to him as a child. So let me continue. So the provisional results of the translation of the dictionary by Ehrman and Grappall led me to this observation. One, that we're talking about ancient Egyptian is a Bantu language from the subgroup Central Africa and South Africa. That Negro Afrikaans predates Proto-Bantu. So, he's is somewhat on par with the concept of a Negro Egyptian, but not quite. So he's just talking about, Black African languages in general, but it's kind of on par with this ultimate family, which Obinga called Negro Egyptian. So for more information about that, in English at least, read my 2016 work, Nasubiti and Aluja Volume 2. So you're saying that Negro Africans or Black African languages or the primary mother tongue predates Proto-Bantu. However, Proto-Bantu predates Chicam or ancient Egyptian. This is the same conclusion as Mboli. Chicam is part of the Bantu linguistic family. So we're talking about ancient Egyptian. Egyptian is a subfamily within the Bantu family. This is exactly the same conclusion that Mboli came to. Chicam is a tone language. And I can't remember if Mboli came to that conclusion specifically. But and so he continues, the suffix T in the current transcription is actually a prefix, not Kemet, but Chikam. So this is where when you hear me say Chikam, that's the word Kemet in the Chiluba Bantu language. So Chikam, Jikam, Chikam. But there are contexts where the T can be a suffix, like Kamat. And so he has support from this from the collagen language. So when they do their feminine T, the feminine T is prefixed to the noun. But they do have T suffixes, saying that are different than the feminine T. Okay. His vocabulary is in use, or the Egyptian vocabulary is in use to this day. The current transcription, the Egyptological transcription currently hides the life or vitality of Chikam or Egyptian. There is no one who has made the findings and formulated with this clarity similar working hypotheses. So what he's saying is that in my presentation, I'm arguing all of this. So there's no one who has come to the International Congress of Egyptologists and presented this type of work. Because none of y'all, these 100% white men, are doing this kind of work. Y'all, this is not your interest, and you're not qualified to do it. So I inform you that I mastered Chiluba, my mother tongue, very well. I discovered after more than 25 years of permanent contact with Chikam, or the Egyptian, that the language I had learned in Munich, because that's where he studied Egyptology in Germany, was the ancestor of the language I speak. The language I speak is understood in Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, Angola, much of Gabon, Cameroon, Namibia, and South Africa. So I take more than 300 million Africans to witness, and more than 500 million about the African substrate, or Proto-Bantu. The universe of control and correction is sociologically representative. Who is the modern Egyptologist who has already formulated the hypothesis of the vitality of the ancient Egyptian language? Who has publicly proclaimed Chikam is still spoken today? The problem is to find a subfamily in the great Bantu linguistic family that comes closest to the vocabulary and speaking attested by the pharaonic text. So he's giving you an outline here. It's like who, because again, he's harping on this request for original research that advances the field of Egyptology. And so when somebody presents this information to them, they just a priori dismiss it without any information or knowledge on this whatsoever. And so again, this will always be a thing. Check anybody who is in opposition of this. I can 9 times out of 10 guarantee you that none of them has ever read any of these African scholars' works. None. Everybody always has something to say about an argument without reading the text. And then some will read the text and not comprehend what's going on and try to read and try to make arguments. And so this is a common theme. What is that? Okay. Do I want to read this one? Well, I'll say this. Yeah, I'll read this too. So in section 8, racism and apartheid, 150 years of anti-Nubian and anti-Negro Egyptology. There is a kind of apartheid in Egyptology. Again, he knows he's an Egyptologist. Nubian studies are victims of indescribable racism. Certain Egyptologists allow themselves, with regard to blacks, insults of all kinds. Having worked on the discrimination of Nubian Egyptology, I know what I am talking about. The consequence is that in the name of this anti-Nubian, anti-Negro racism, some are trying to stifle research on ancient Egypt and Central Africa. Now, this is very compelling because I recall a hold on. Excuse me. I remember a conversation that I was having at a conference that Dr. I forget that damn fast. Dr. Schumacher Keita, the biological anthropologist, was at. And he was telling me how certain European scholars try to sabotage African research. And this is why it is important for African scholars to get formally trained to be able to take over certain aspects of the research project. Because these people will come in, sabotage the research, and then try to make it seem as if that the African scholars were not doing their due diligence. And so this is him telling me this personally. And so you hear this again coming from Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo. Like, people just don't know how trifling a lot of these scholars are, these white European scholars, when it comes to this type of information. And so, as he says here, the consequence is that in the name of this anti-Nubian, anti-Negro racism, some are trying to stifle research on ancient Egypt and Central Africa. And so in modern times, you have Negropeans who work on behalf of Europeans without reading any literature whatsoever, without any training, trying to dismiss the conclusions of the African scholars. And they're nowhere near trained like the African scholars. So remember all the training that you saw, saying from Mubabinge Bilolo. Read about the training of Sheikh Anta Diop. Read about Oman Diji. Read about Abubakar Musalam. Read about Theophilo Benga and the training that they have. And so, like, even in my book, in Aluja Volume 1, I had a peer read, certain of my chapters for critical feedback, part of the peer review process. And that is Dr. Kareem Abdul Bangura from Sierra Leone. This brother has 5 PhDs and 3 master's degrees. His 5 PhDs are in computer science, mathematics, linguistics, economics, and political science. And then his masters are in linguistics and political science. So he has 8 advanced degrees. But there's certain of us who would want to know what white scholar with 1 damn degree reviews and agrees with my work. Like, this is how low we've fallen. Skip over the Africans who are more qualified than any of them. But we skip over our qualified, highly educated African scholars to just parrot the nonsensical banter from a lot of these unqualified European scholars. But I'll continue. They encourage research on ancient Egypt and China, but stifle research on other cultures in the Nile Valley and the Congo. So, like, I don't know if people have been, you would have to be, dealing with the literature, but you're starting to see some, Egyptological, papers being written on the relationship between ancient Egypt and China. And those are accepted. But as soon as you start talking about ancient Egypt and Central Africa, they try to stifle your research, try to stifle your voice amongst your fellow colleagues. So I myself had to present in ethnology and Africanistics a seminar on the path followed by the ancient Egyptians to go to Latin America. It was a synthesis of research from the Vienna Academy of Sciences. The author had well documented the Egyptian traces in China and Latin America, while encouraging research on China and Egypt. However, we oppose the study of the Nile Valley or the Nile Basin in its entirety. Isn't this curious? So, knowing that the Nile goes all the way into Central Africa, and that, by now, hesitantly, more and more Egyptologists are understanding and will argue in print that the Egyptians and its culture comes from the south, from the Sahara, and from down south, from up south, as we call it, coming out of Uganda and Sudan into in Egypt. So you would think that you would want to know more about the cultures and things that existed that ultimately gave birth to Kemet. But no, they want to go all the way to China and in Latin America in terms of relationships. So he finds that very curious. When Ebers exposed this anti-Negrism in Egyptology, represented his pseudo arguments against the blacks, Cheikh Anta Diop was not born. The war of races and cultures in Egyptology dates to the 19th century. When Westerman insulted black scientists about Egypt, Diop and Mubabinge were still young. Without courses in Egyptology and racism, this war continues to this day. So what he's trying to say, and you would really have to read some of this old literature coming out of the late 1800s and the early 1900s concerning black people. Like read Budge's, dictionaries and stuff to this nature, and you see just the overt racism and ideas that come from these European scholars. And so what he's saying is that this is not new behavior. What we're seeing today is the same as what was prominent in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So when David Livingstone, who came to visit the Egyptological Museum in London, arrived in Angola and Congo, he did not fail to point out the current events and the vitality of the pharaonic culture in this region. So when you read the early works of David Livingstone, the first thing that he commented on is how when he went into Angola and Central Congo, how much of the ancient Egyptian themes were still alive in these cultures. So there are many such testimonies, but we want to ignore those. So we want to quiet those voices. So now he goes into the representation of Africa among the keynote speakers. So he says, Professor, Emeritus Jean Assmann, teacher Manfred Bitak, Vienna. Title: The Nature of the Relationship Between Egypt and the Minoan World in the Thutmoside period. So remember that this is a rough translation from Google. So where it says teacher, it should say professor. But that's technically what a professor is. It's just a word meaning teacher. So Professor Christopher J. Irie from Liverpool. Professor Richard Jasno from Johns Hopkins. Title: From Alexandria to Rakatas, Progress, Prospects, and Problems in a Study of Greco-Egyptian Literary Interaction. Professor Emeritus Geoffrey T. Martin from Cambridge. Title: Re-excavating KV 57, that's Valley of the Kings tomb of Horemheb in the Valley of the Kings. It emerges from this list that all the main speakers are Westerners with a European and white majority. The internationality, the intercontinentality, and the interraciality of the International Association and of the International Congress of Egyptologists are trampled on without anyone protesting. So, of course, when white folks, so this is part of the argument. So, recently we had a good brother who tried to make the argument that the African scholars only speak amongst themselves. And that is not the case. The African scholars are always publishing and going into these international conferences and these international publications in public I cannot speak today, and publishing their works and engaging with European and Asian and American scholars. I don't know too many Egyptologists in South America, but there are a good number. It's funny that they would charge us with that claim, and that is totally wrong. But understand that Europeans will have a whole conference about African people and not have any African people there whatsoever. So it's just like with the Berlin Conference. So you know about the Berlin Conference when these European powers divided Africa and put the borders that exist there today in the winter of 1884 and 1885. So hold on one sec. Got a text anyway. So how are they going to have a whole conference in things of this nature? This happens all the time. You would not see any any black folks, any Africans at a lot of these conferences. They try to get rid of them. And so they can have conversations with themselves and not have any conversations with Africans. But if Africans hold conferences and create journals and create publications, then somehow we're being biased in things of this nature. And so it's folks who don't know what the hell they're talking about because they aren't engaged. They're not a part of this tradition, who just likes to run off at the mouth and don't understand any of this history. So why not reduce the number of Western and white speakers to give the floor to speakers from Black Africa, Asia, Latin America, etc.? What is the originality of the themes chosen here? So he's saying that this is business as usual. There's nothing original about, let's read these titles again. The nature of the relationship between Egypt and the Minoan world in the Thutmoside period. From Alexander to Rakotis, progress, prospects, and problems in the study of Greco-Egyptian literary interaction. Re-excavating KV 57 of Horemheb and the Valley of the Kings. These are topics that have been addressed ad infinitum. They may bring a little something different as a result of more research, but all of this stuff, there's, as he said, there's over 3,000 publications on these very topics. So a list of the members of the scientific committee. The constitution of the scientific committee also remains largely European and largely Western. Black Africa is not represented, and this is not normal. Here is the constitution of the committee. So when you go into other things, when you have an international, organization and committees, you'll see a diversity of people from around the world involved. But the white people will call something international and it'd be nothing but white folks from 3 countries in Europe. And this is supposed to be a diverse and inclusive, organization. And so he's given a list of the names here. So Professor John Baines, Professor Christopher J. Irie, Professor Nicholas Grimal, Professor Zahi Hawass. So Zahi Hawass is the only person from Egypt. So y'all know who Zahi Hawass is, and you know that he's, a mix of those Persians, Arabs, folks. So, and he's the one against, Black Africa. So, hold on one second. Oh, okay. Hold on. Y'all gonna have to hold on one sec. I gotta answer this door. Hold on. Okay, I'm sorry. Somebody was trying to get into the crib and didn't have the key, and so I had to go answer the door. So luckily I had my phone on. So all right, now I'm back to start some more mess. So we'll continue. So yeah, Zahi Hawass, the only person on the council from Egypt, and the only probably reason why he was even on the committee is because he is or at least he was at the time, the head or the Supreme Council of Antiquities. So anything that you had to do in Egypt, you had to go through Zahi Hawass. If Zahi Hawass wasn't who he was in terms of his position, he would not be on the committee. And so we continue. Professor Yvonne Koenig, Professor Alan B. Lloyd, Professor Ludwig Moritz, Professor Joachim Frederick Quack, Robert K. Rittner, Alessandro Riccati, and Pascal Vernis, all white men, with the exception of Zahi Hawass, which I would still put him as a white man. That's just me personally. But anyway, so how do you notice the absence of Black Africa, Asia, Latin America in this committee? It's not even racism, it's primitive clanism. Europe is only represented by its economic superpowers. It's abnormal. It's pathological. It's a cultural crime, unworthy of a man who has been fortunate enough to know the requirements of Ma'at. So they disregard the call of Jean Leclerc. So masters like Jean Leclerc, Vauquelin, Fossing have reiterated for years the need to integrate research on Egypt in their African context. These are all European white people who, when engaged with the African scholars, saw that there's shortcomings from the European side and said that we need to have conversations with these Africans. Their work will advance the field of Egyptology. And so these are all major Egyptologists and linguists. So research on Egypt in the African context and promote the contacts between African researchers and their European colleagues. It is neither necessary nor desirable to have the same theses, because from the clash of ideas, from the clash of positions, light shines. So what he's saying is that we don't have to agree or have to present the same things. It's these clash of ideas from where the light shines, as what he says, that we advance the field of Egyptology. This similar wish was in the 80s during the Munich conference by the master Eric Hornung and by the late Professor Quagbar and Levon. So the Munich conference is one of those other Egyptology conferences, you know, outside of the 1974 Cairo Symposium. This was a major conference in the 80s. That these African scholars and these Europeans engaged. There was another one in 1996. And so the teacher Grimal of Paris criticized during an interview I had with him in 2007 African Egyptologists for refusing to participate in the international Egyptological meetings. So he, Professor Grimal, was of the belief that the African scholars were the ones not coming and wanting to deal with them. That was far from the case. The case is that you have these European people who control the funds for these international conferences and the publications who were refusing the Africans from showing up. In Cambridge in 1995, many other colleagues also regretted underrepresentation of Black Africa. But I see that they all misunderstood the degree of anti-Negroism, anti-melaninism in the Western Egyptian community. We dismiss Africa because it disturbs prejudices and non-critical premises. So when white people speak amongst themselves, they could put together hypotheses uncritically, make claims, and make it seem like these were hard, proven claims without any challenge whatsoever. But they know when the African scholars come in, we critically analyze everything. And we will point out the shortcomings of all of their premises regarding this African civilization. So the proof is there. The Africans are victims of primitive racism, apartheid, exclusion, even attempts at existential annihilation on the part of some of their Western colleagues. Certain Egyptologists, certainly a minority, but occupying strategic positions, are so blinded by Egyptian anti-Negrism that they no longer see the vitality of Egypt and Nubia in contemporary Africa. So all scientists commit their own Reputation, when you say here, section 12, all scientists bear responsibility for their results. He puts his reputation at stake when he presents his results into the international community. There is no one, absolutely no European or Western Egyptologist alive who can argue that the presentation of provisional results of the Waterbush translation project into a Bantu language would be unoriginal or contribute to Egyptian studies. I had asked you to place my conference in plenary or even at the opening so that most of our colleagues can take part in the debate. I wanted to take the international community of philologists to witness in order to avoid endless debates behind the scenes. It's a challenge. So this is something that a lot of these Negropeans don't understand. We will challenge anybody. But, you know, we live for the live debate. Like our good brother, Chief X, made a post on Facebook, you know, asking if he or somebody else would pay a round trip ticket for me to go to UCLA and teach about Negro Egyptian to a linguistics class and colleagues at UCLA, would I do it? You damn right I would do it. And matter of fact, my response on his post was, Omar, don't scare. Set it up. That's what we do. And so we're not afraid of anyone because our arguments are always based on science. And you have all of these unscientific Negroes who always want to make arguments about stuff that they never studied or understand. And so we welcome the challenge. We don't run from nothing. And so, number 13, the West does not have a monopoly on knowledge. Exactly. Africa is not a scientific colony of the West. The latter does not have the monopoly on knowledge, and even less cannot have the monopoly of knowledge of a country in the Nile Valley. The poor Egyptian knowledge of the environment of the Great Lakes region at the source of the Nile casts shadows and doubts over the scientificity and seriousness of much vaunted research. Dialogue is absolutely necessary. Again, you know, until you start reading this literature, you will not fully understand the degree that a lot of this Egyptological work is personal opinion about stuff. They're guessing. And then what happens is that you have an individual who is prestigious within the field of Egyptology. And because they say something, then you'll get like 20 scholars after them just repeating what they said. And then you have non-critical Negropeans thinking that this is consensus because you have 20 other people just repeating what this one influential Egyptologist has proposed. And now this has become dogma without any kind of proof whatsoever. No working out of the problem, nothing. And so I'll continue. Western approach to Africa, acme of dilettantism and arrogance. As most Westerners laugh when I tell them that I am a Westernologist, a Europeanologist, that I'm in terms of specialty, Grecologist, Germanologist, Frankology. In Grec, he's talking about in terms of specialty in Grecology, Germanology, and Frankology. Like you don't even use those terms. Hold on one sec. You don't even use those terms because for some reason you would think that sounds strange. What do you mean that you're that you study Frankology? Like think about that when we talk about Egyptology. Nobody talks about that they study Germanology or Grecology because this is that othering, you know, and y'all really have to start studying some African-centered literature and for more examples of this inherent bias and othering of non-European cultures. And so European is the norm, and then everybody else is the other. And so you study them as, you know, as subjects, you know what I'm saying? No, excuse me, as objects. But in Afrocentricity, You know, we look at African people as subjects of their own reality and agents of their own reality. And so if we're studying African people, we ground ourselves in the culture in which we're studying. That's all Afrocentricity means. And so we don't look at them from foreigners' lenses. We look at them from the eyes of the people themselves. And so I'll continue. So Africans also amuse themselves before the Egyptian dilettantism of the West. They make fun of these people who believe themselves to be specialists. And he's talking about the Africans. So the Africans make fun of these Europeans who believe themselves to be specialists in Egyptian religion and African art after only 15 hours of lessons on Egyptian religion or on pharaonic art. So you are masters now because you took some classes at a university. After a few sessions of Gardner's grammar, we believe we are specialists in African linguistics, capable of correcting Mubabinge Bilolo or Bilolo on the Bantu foundations of pharaonic language. So you have Negropeans who ain't studied, can't write a lick of ancient Egyptian, ain't read Gardner's grammar for nothing, can't read hieroglyphs, don't study any language, who will have the audacity to laugh at these type of conclusions or whatnot. And they take the word of people who took a few classes on Egyptian grammar, and now they can speak intelligently on African languages. So hold on one sec. Okay, I'm back. So people who have never participated in the enthronement ceremony of an African king or a chief, who never participated in the burial of a chief, who never took part in the ceremonies preparation for hunting or war in Africa, believe themselves after 30 hours of lessons on Egyptian history to be quote unquote specialists in pharaonic culture, capable of positioning it in a relation to other African cultures that they ignore completely. So all of these Africans, like I said, Mubabinge Bilolo is of royalty in Africa. He belongs to a royal clan. He has seen kings be buried as his relatives. When we're talking about these, rituals and things that you see in the tomb walls, that stuff still goes on to this day in the Congo. And I speak about at least one example in Oluja Volume 1 in the introduction. Without these African examples, you are guessing at what is going on in pharaonic Egypt. And so he's saying all these people who have no experience amongst Africans and African countries, they take these courses written by white folks and they think they become specialists on societies and cultures and languages in which they don't know. We do not have the same attitude in front of the skin of a leopard, a lion, or a crocodile. The leopard, it's me, it's my double. It is the manifestation of my power. And it is a symbol of our royalty, of divinity. And like what he's saying here is very powerful, because if you don't know the Egyptian language and literature, you should know that your ba is supposed to be an aspect of yourself. And as I discussed, as I argued in Oluja Volume 1, the ba is your spirit double. And there's a reason why you wear the leopard skins as a priest, because the word for leopard is also ba. And so this comes into this aspect of paronymy in which I was talking about in the Nesubiti book. Because these two words sound alike, they were linked. So this is why you go all in Central and East and Southern Africa and see these people with the leopard and cheetah skins as a representation, saying of their spirit double on earth. You would not know that reading Egyptian text, because the Egyptians don't explain it that way. And I'll just continue. And when an African researcher from the line of power, remember he's of royalty, sees the Egyptian priest or the Nubian king wearing a leopard skin, he's now speaking for himself. He knows and he understands the why without going through Western Egyptology. Like, I don't have to read this stuff from I don't have to get validation from a European. We still do this stuff in my culture. African Egyptologists think their culture. That's not like a European. Egyptians are others to European Egyptologists. They're an object to be studied. But the African Egyptologists, they think in their culture. So when they approach the Egyptian phenomena, they see this, they see the words come alive that are in their language. They see the rituals, the burial practices, the techniques involved in terms of reverence for ancestors, etc., etc. The way that they name their cities and what they name the cities, all of that stuff still goes on in Africa today. So they do not dissertate on a foreign culture. Talking about the African Egyptologists. African women exhibit every day in villages from north to the south a series of types of braids when they have never been in an Egyptian museum. In other words, the same braids and hairstyles that you see on the Egyptian walls, these African people are still rolling with today and never stepped foot in an Egyptian museum or open an Egyptology book. So it's from this pool that the African Egyptologists emerge from. So when they're bringing information about ancient Egypt that is different from the European, is because they have the advantage over the European, because the European isn't immersed in the culture which gave birth to ancient Kemet. So dilettantism also manifests itself in a culpable ignorance of the climatic conditions of the sources of the Nile, which pushes some to write even today that it would be warmer at the sources of the Nile in the Great Lakes region than in Egypt. I remind you that it is with this childish argument that some have tried to justify the alleged difference in pigmentation between the Nubians and the Egyptians. So I'll just skip these. You can read these on your own. Preparation into let me see if I want to read. All colleagues who constantly devalue Nubians or whites in their courses and their writings aware that they are insulting the Egyptians today. So exactly. So I'll just read this section. Fight against the preparation of interracial tensions in present day Egypt by certain Western Egyptologists. So he's asking the question: are colleagues who constantly devalue Nubians or blacks in their courses or in their writings aware that they are insulting the Egyptians today? Do they really ignore that they are sowing violence that they're in their current Egyptian society? Because if you read the early literature, they how should I say, they sow this discord between the Egyptians and the Nubians, and they try to frame it in racial terms. And it is that those writings that affect the African Nubian Egyptians who still live there in Egypt to this day. And not understanding that the quote unquote Nubians, which is a really wrong-headed term, because there was no Nubians in ancient times. There was different clans in Tasseti, Lower Egypt. I mean, it's really Upper Egypt, but in the lower southern part of Egypt, Tasseti, and in northern Sudan and east and west, saying of the Nile, going to the extremes in the desert. And so the Egyptians come from those people. Those are the same people. And so the Egyptians are still there in speaking a variation of their languages. I will continue. It is the Egyptian students in Europe who most protest against the way in which certain Egyptologists speak of their fellow citizens, speak of their parents or their ancestors. Part of the current Egyptian population is Black. Egyptology must divorce from this war of races and cultures. Africans have fun when a European says Tai is white or Queen Tai. Why do some colleagues get angry when an African says Tai is Black, like his own mother? Oh, my bad. This is King Tai. There's a Queen Tai. And so I'm thinking someone else. No, this is a king here. If they consider Tai their sister, well, no, this is yeah. I'm thinking this is Tai. So I had it right the first time. This is wrong translation. If they consider Tai their sister, why did they blush when they were told, for example, that Plotinus was an Egyptian? You know, and you had to know from earlier. Normalization of friends. Let me read this first part here. As I pointed out and recalled in my various publications, I have met since 1980 Western Egyptologists of all generations. We grow old together. Sorry, dear Grimal, we grew up together with most of them. I was supported and encouraged by the cream of Egyptology. Remember that he studied Egyptology in Germany. Wildung, Barta, Leclerc, Darshan, Hornung, Osman, Baines, George, Quachber, Virgo, Afvalg, Fossing, Bergman, Terence Dusquin, Anton Mueller, Bicard, as well as by most of their successors, Grimal, Lopriano, Bickel, Jung, Quack, Buchberger, Regine Schultz, and other friends of the University of Munich. The University Library of Munich Institute of Egyptology remained open for us for a very long time. The Queen Elizabeth Foundation for Egyptology, the Library of the College of France, and the Library of the University of Heidelberg welcomed us with great joy. The University of Barcelona has remained open to dialogue and cooperation with African Egyptologists. And so this is one of those rare institutions where the Egyptology department in the University of Barcelona actually they lean and they just deal with Egypt in its African context. And so because of so much of the shortcomings of the perspectives in these other schools of thought, you know, they only found solutions to things in Africa. So the reception of my works is exceptional, but their efforts and their commitment are constantly thwarted by those who like to give lessons to Africans while refusing to receive them. So he's name dropping here. And so for those of us who are into Egyptology, a few of these names I know would be general because some of their works have been translated into English. But, you know, for that German school, which is the premier school of Egyptologists, for which Mubabinge Bilolo was trained in, he's saying that their works, the reception of my works is exceptional among them. This is the cream of the crop when it comes to Egyptologists. But their efforts and their commitment are constantly thwarted by those who like to give lessons to Africans while refusing to receive them. And this is very telling. And so we ask those who are convinced that we cannot continue to impose on Africans the reading of the West while refusing to give the floor to Africans or to listen to their reading of history to mobilize to protest against the current trend. So he's speaking against this trend of trying to deny the validity of African scholars, especially without even reading their text. And so it's just a little more here and continue. So I'm not going to read the rest of that, but I think y'all get the gist of exactly what I'm talking about here. So I'm just going to come back to the presentation, to the page here. And what time is it? I started at 7:30, so it's just right under 2 hours, the whole conversation. So I appreciate you all for listening, and sorry I couldn't really kind of keep up what was going on in the chat. So, if there's any questions or anything, I may even, risk adding, any of y'all to the to the chat. I mean, to the conversation. So if anybody wants to, saying come in, we can hash it out here. So, but yeah, I hope this helps to put some light, and I can provide stories like this all of the time. And so when we understand that, you have these Europeans who are in positions of power in the sense that they control, the publications of certain journals, they control who gets access to certain conferences and things of that nature, who gets money for excavations and who gets grants money to do research. You will see that this is a very old boys, a good old boys network and system, and they will try any and everything to get rid of African scholars, and even try to prevent us from even even get degrees in Egyptology. So if we can get, for example, Dr. Raketi Amin, who studied at the Oriental Institute, to tell you her stories of how they were trying to get her out of the program, and like people just don't know because they're internet trolls basically, and aren't involved in any of this in terms of any serious scholarship and getting involved in presenting this information. And so I put these guys' information above any of these folks. And so somebody made a comment, about white people reviewing the book. I'm like, if you just read the gosh darn book, you would know the white people who read the book because I named them in the text. This is why we don't pay attention to a lot of these internet trolls, because they're not serious. The first thing you got to do is read the shit before you can, make comments on them. It's like, that's basic. Like, read the work first, then comment. And even before then, if you just need training, train first. But anyway, I put the link in the I'm gonna put it again. So if anybody wants to join, but if not, then I will just, saying shut it down. But again, this is why it's important for African people to train and publish your material. And to do it based on scientific principles, because you're going to have people who challenge the work, and that's regardless of what your color is. That's how scholarship works in general. Everybody reads and wants to find the flaws in your text. So this is why it's important to have a a scientific background, because you'll come to find out that, like, I've noticed that when the scientists actually get involved in the conversation in Egyptology, the conversation is totally different. And so for example, when we come with Sheikh Anta Diop or Theophilo Benga or Theophilo Benga or Jean-Claude Mboli, all of them have scientific backgrounds. And matter of fact, I just discovered, and this was by accident, that Jean-Claude Mboli has 2 engineering patents. Because his first training is in engineering and electrical engineering. And so he has 2 patents out there. you know, again, as I mentioned, in terms of Shekantijoke, in terms of physics and chemistry. And so when you have, and even Obinga's training in mathematics, it's when you have these mathematical minds attack these Egyptological conundrums, they get totally different outcomes because they have no a priori assumptions that would halt or distort their results. Whereas, you know, you have these certain biases in the Egyptological literature where they have yet to prove certain concepts, and but they pass them off as fact when that is not the case. And so I see that we have 3 individuals who have decided to join the conversation. So we will keep it going. So I'll just go in order, at least on my screen from left to right, is introducing Brother Wujawu. And then we have Brother Ifatunde Fayemi, aka Brother Sunjeti. And then we have Sister Jolanda Juju Zachary. And should I say Julanda or Yolanda or Yolanda? How should I say that?
Jolanda.
Jolanda. So I welcome all 3 of you, you know, to the panel. So I don't know how much of what was discussed that you caught, but I guess we can start off on your opinions on the presentation, the subject matter, and, you know, what are your thoughts on everything?
I'm just here for the smoke. No, let me stop because people take me serious. No, that was an excellent presentation and everything. I don't have anything to add. I think everything is clear. Just wanted to be part of any
So I welcome all.
Oh,
ooh, hold on. I added Sister Naya, so hopefully her mic is muted now. But you may have something, some other device that is on that we're getting feedback. But Sister Naya has joined the conversation, so we'll get back to you, Sister Naya. Continue, Brother Wujawu.
Yeah, I was just saying, excellent discussion and presentation on that. And I just hope that it's understood and people agree. And I was looking at the chat, and it seems like, the majority of everybody gets it. And basically, this should be an inspiration for future work, and why it's encouraged for people to train, study, learn methodology for whatever field of study that you're focused on, the proper methods for that study, so that you can know and learn to discern, to know when you actually know something. And then as far as practicing criticism or critiques, you have to study and train and read things before you sit out there and try to critique and argue situations. So I think, hopefully this will inspire people to cut that down as well.
All right. Ifatunde.
All right, Hotep, everyone. I'm just here for the smoke. Now it's that was a great presentation and a needed conversation. And what it does is it speaks to the centuries old Negrophobia on the part of the Eurocentrism and those who adhere to that train of thinking. Now, one thing that is important to understand, as pointed out by our elder scholar, Marimba Ani, is the European Utamaroho. And the Utamaroho is the culturally mandated responsiveness to non-European phenomena. And again, that's the European Utamaroho. And Utamaroho is how a people, a group, responds to phenomena. be it internal phenomenon or external phenomenon. In this case, the European, and how they marginalize things that are considered non-European, or as you said earlier, Sar, the otherness. Mubabinge uses the phrase cultural other, which is equivalent to the term otherness. And Egyptologists and and those who adhere to the Eurocentric paradigm of racism and anti-Africanisms, i.e., Negrophobia, is that they're able to make these conclusions, conferences, etc., among themselves without ever being checked. And they are accustomed to making these enterprises with little to no challenge. So what happens is you have, as you call them, Negropeans who adhere to Eurocentrism or the European Utama Rojo, who subconsciously have these reflexes. See, this is what we're seeing when we have brothers and very few sisters, but it's primarily men who, without reading the text or engage in any critical study of equal detail or equal time, they automatically, respond with hatred and dismissiveness. So why is that? We always ask, well, why are they doing that? That is because they still have deep down inside the European Utama Rojo. Now, Dr. Wade Noble used the term scattered consciousness. So scattered consciousness, and there's a Kikongo term that translates as tornadoes of the mind. So they're not even together internally. So this reveals itself, and we've experienced this back in 2016, when we really started emphasizing African-centeredness, African-centered literature, African-centered scholars, and Afrocentricity, which is a methodology and paradigm that, as you said earlier, Sar, it centralizes African phenomenon rather than marginalizes. See, the European Utama Wazo, which is the culturally structured thought, it's a thinking pattern. It, by default, marginalizes African phenomena. So once we really started those conversations, those who adhere to the Afro-Asiatic model, which is a secularization of the Hamido-Semitic model, which is based in the Hamitic myth, which is completely pseudo science, we experience immediate response of dismissiveness. And it happens over and over and over. And you have people who jump on a bandwagon, they're just repeating because they get into emotionalism. So the brothers and sisters, mainly brothers, who have these responses is subconscious. It has to be subconscious because they have not done the detailed study. They only start reading and studying after the first and part of my it's not German. Part of my German, the first intellectual ass kicking they get, then they want to start studying or actually reading. But they're reading for the sake of debate. They're not reading for knowledge. You're reading because you had a conclusion first and you're trying to find things to support your conclusion. This is not how scholarship works. So going back to your presentation, Asar, what you read is an account by, I believe, Mubabinge Bilolo on these things, him experiencing things on the inside in academia, overseas, dealing with European scholars. And you only have a few European scholars that Dr. Jeremy Clark calls radical Europeans. who say, hold on, we really need these studies, but they are the exception to the rule. They are a minority in populace. So those type of people would be more so allies. We're not saying friends, we're saying allies. There's a difference. But again, they are the minority. So, so when these brothers go on and start saying, and I think you mentioned Brother Chief X, that's the only person I've seen say that, at least recently. What white scholars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My question is, why is that your response? It's a psychological reflex. You see what I'm saying? It's not well thought out. And I'm only using that as an example because that's something we've experienced in the past. So it's not just him. This is something that's common.
Yeah. So again, it's you know, what white scholar, you know, it's like, see, this is how I know that people don't have scientific backgrounds, because people who are serious scholars, and especially those who have scientific backgrounds, their first question isn't what white scholars validate your work. They want to know, what is the evidence that supports your conclusion? That should be the only response that someone who does not know needs to ask. And so that's exactly what Mubabinge Bilolo was saying in his open letter. Like, you would dismiss it when you should have said, well, this is interesting. Can you provide us some proof? Because we understand on an academic level that you have all kinds of quacks who make all kinds of claims. And so you can't just accept any and everyone's presentation, because then you'll get the aliens built the pyramid folks, and you know that the pyramids align on all the grids, you know, on the earth type stuff, and there's pyramids on Mars. And so they try their best to make sure that those, you know, folks, there's even one conference that I was looking into trying to get to, but they won't even let you submit an abstract unless you got a PhD in Egyptology or a degree in Egyptology itself. And so, but you know, talking to people, you know, who are part of these committees and things, and this is what they was telling. Like, we used to get all kinds of, you know, proposals from all these different types of folks. And so they said to cut down on that, this is what they had to do. And so they were talking about the quacks, just white folks, not the African folks. But, you know, but they take it to the extreme when they see information that is not part of their everyday milieu. So I'm gonna keep it going. So I'm gonna go to Sister Jolanda Juju. Your thoughts and opinions on the presentation and your added insight.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, can you talk a little louder? You seem to be low.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, but it's just it's the volume is low, but I think we can hear you. So go ahead.
You hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm having problems with my mic. So peace to the panel, definitely peace to the chat. Bibi Fahodi family. First, I want to say excellent presentation, and thank you very much, Asar, for doing so. I'm, of course, the least experienced on the panel, so I was just giving some of my thoughts as a student and as one who's pretty much an observer. I am learning some things and moving in a direction to help push Black African scholarship, so to speak, to help create this agency that's needed. So thank you for the presentation. Also, thank you for giving an insight on the dilemmas and adversity that Black African scholars have been going through for some time. I went to FSU, so I've worked under a few, like the greats of Dr. William Jones, Dr. Naeem Akbar, and and I saw the struggle to get accepted into the academic consensus in their discipline. But this is our discipline, so we definitely should have agency. Should be nothing wrong with doing so and creating that. So it behooves me that some of us have a problem with that and that we would uphill somewhat to authority that is pretty much faulty. So I appreciate the education and the learning and continue what you all do. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for listening. And so we have another sister who joined us, Sister Emiket. We're going to first go to Sister Naya, then we're going to go to you, Emiket. So Sister Naya, if you are still there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this opportunity to be on the panel. Bujawu, Great Sanjeti, Emiket, and Bujawu, some of my favorite people in the conscious community quotations. So every time I hear you talk about language, I always get so excited, and I grab my pen and I try to figure out like the connections. And I can go in many directions with this, but I think the most important direction is to understand the importance of legitimate cultural practices. I mean, the study of language from an African perspective is a legitimate cultural practice. And what I mean by that is that there are certain realities that we are faced with being Africans in America. I think that W.E. Du Bois talks about it, the double consciousness. Even in African tradition, they have the twinness and a lot of different concepts that kind of bring in what happens when you're an African in America. But if we go before that and we begin to kind of look at our perspectives and where we get these perspectives from, when you study in school, when you make the decision to go to college and to get an education, you're forced to learn European psychology. You're forced into their humanities. You're thrown into their worldview. And there's no qualms about it. There's no apologies. There's no explanations. It's just the information that you're given, and you're given it in a way that is universal, in a way that is perceived by others to be the universal thought and thinking and way of life. It's not until you begin to study African people and maybe even Eastern people, Chinese people, Asian people, that you begin to realize that there's different ways of thinking. Like there's different ways of perceiving the world around you. And as Black people, it's our responsibility, especially Black people living in America, it's our responsibility to understand African thought pre-dynastic period, before slavery. We have to understand how Africans thought, because that's important to our psychology today. And so when we're having these discussions, and when you have people challenging the information, I think that it's important. And Wujawu said it really well. He said that you have to be able to conceptualize questions. You have to be able to understand what you're asking, because you want to understand how important it is for us to have this legitimate practice. Like, we have to understand how this practice helps us to develop a psyche that is healthy. And even in psychology, like cultural psychology is a legitimate practice. Black psychology is a legitimate practice. Even when you get to the treating people for individual conditions, for instance, what therapies you use. There's cognitive behavioral therapy and there's trauma-based therapies. And all of these practices acknowledge the agency of that person's culture. Nobody goes into any type of academic discipline or any type of counseling session or psychological session and just totally disregards that person's agency. That is a form of neglect and malpractice. So when we're Black, it is essentially neglectful and malpractice to not even consider our scholars. Even if we don't understand everything, it's our job to do due diligence in understanding these concepts, because it's important to our overall health and well-being as African people, as individuals, as well as for the entire group. So That's kind of how I look at everything. So I really appreciate what you're doing with this book, and just keep it coming.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And lastly, we have well, Sister Jelani seemed like she left us, but we have Sister Imiket. And if you're still there, were you able to catch the presentation? And if so, what were your thoughts and added insights into the discussion?
Yes, Dua, for allowing me to be on the panel, and hopefully I can be heard clearly.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, yes, I did actually catch the whole presentation, and I will definitely, it was a really, really good presentation, very, very inspiring, especially for somebody like me. I'm coming from the continent and seeing, you know, what African scholars, the level that they, you know, they function at. And that kind of really inspired me to, you know, not just sit around and get caught up in all these little dramas, and, you know, be inspired to that to be the level that I should be on. And you know, I hope that it also inspired other people. And I would also agree with what Senet Naya actually wrote on a chat about the you know, the topic itself, the African agency being very important. And because for me, you know, coming from my experience, I understand this very well, because I actually, unfortunately, I don't have them with me here, but I do have textbooks that my mom used, you know, during their learning periods, and the textbooks that I used, and I've seen the textbook that other people use currently in, you know, African curriculum on a continent, and seeing the differences of the information that has been portrayed when it comes to history, specifically Kenyan history, and how you know, that has grown and changed through times. And you could see also the difference from the authors who are actually writing those the history at that particular time. Especially my mom's book is a huge difference. You can, you know, and from her book, actually, I was gonna say, looking at that, and also growing up in Denmark, and I don't know if we have any other European people who are in Europe listening on a chat, because I noticed even in Denmark, when I would go to the libraries and I would go to the African section and look at the African books growing up there, it would be the same thing pretty much with the books that my mom had during her schooling years. And African history, usually there's two things that you see, and that usually starts from either slavery or colonization. And it's written with, you know, with European scholars. And most people don't understand that when it comes to your history and somebody writing it for you, and then there's a point where African scholars start writing their, you know, writing or being at the forefront of writing their history, there'll always be corrections. And I've seen that happen through our, you know, our schooling curriculum. But we didn't have so much of a pushback as I see people trying to do over here. It's more of an organic thing where you have things being changed because more people come in and start writing stuff that they know of, as opposed to what somebody else does. And I would say that the pushback wasn't so much there within the continent itself, but then you would see it once you start, you know, pushing that forward to you know, to other sections. But in Africa itself, you know, you have African scholars who just, you know, at this point in time, I can find linguists in, you know, in writing about Doluo. I could find linguists writing about Swahili, and what I see when I read the written works is they're very comfortable, obviously, in correcting some of the errors. Obviously, they have to rely on you know, on these you know, referencing what is written by Europeans, because that's what had the written information was coming from them at first. But they, you know, the problem of correcting that information, I haven't seen it over there, but I see it a lot when it comes to you know, with, you know, in the diaspora side, where it becomes so much of a problem, where most people would not, when I'm talking about most people, I'm talking about you know, Black people, would be having issues or want to see, like, you know, like, would want to see other Europeans per se, you know, validating that stuff before they accept it. I don't see it back home in that sense. I see people actually having very logical, conversations, and when things get corrected, it's in an organic manner. It's not forced, and it's not looked at as something that is suspicious at all.
Indeed. And again, this is just something that, and it's, you have it on the academic level, but it's very interesting on the internet troll level, because none of them are experts in anything, yet they have so much to say about subjects that they don't study. And this is what's problematic for me, because in this day and age where anybody has access to a camera and a microphone, you can create 1,000 videos in a week on YouTube and try to flood it with misinformation. And it will take so much to correct that information. And, what we're fighting against, one, is inaccurate information, and two, just standard laziness from Negropeans to actually read the material and engage the scholarship. And, so I get, into these confrontations about basic stuff that they should know if you actually study the material. So like, you know, for example, with the whole, Greenberg model thing, right? Like Obinga has told us since, the late 80s and early 90s about the non-validity of the Greenberg's language phyla in Africa. But, because an African has said this, oh, it must be wrong, that he's doing this based on biases and stuff like that. And then they only pay attention to the information once we bring out that these European white scholars say the same thing. And so, for example, I'm gonna share my screen real quick, and adding Shakara. We'll get back to you in a second on the panel. So let me share my screen. So this is a conversation that, hold on. It's not going to let me. I don't think it's going to let me share my screen, for the simple fact, it will. Yes, it will. So it's just acting slow right now. Just give it a second to actually do the sharing. There we go. So I'm gonna wait till I can see it on the other screen. Okay, there we go. So this is a conversation in a linguistics group on Facebook that I recently had a couple of weeks ago. So I presented some information which compared Proto-Indo-European, Middle Egyptian, and Chiluba Bantu, and then another one was dealing with Proto-Bantu, in this Anatolian group. This is a Proto-Indo-European linguistic group. And so if I can just make this a little bigger so that y'all can read it. Hold on. Okay, there we go. So There's a linguist by the name of Michael Schultz who made a comment. He said, please look at the existing Proto-Bantu reconstructions to see that all these correspondences are due to chance. And he obviously doesn't know how do you calculate chance in this instance. And so you have this other person respond. You really can't see all of his comments, but it's not really relevant for right here. So we'll just go up to where I am. So y'all should know on Facebook, my government name is Harold Johnson. So I respond in part because, you know, you see the see more there. Greetings, Michael Schultz. We have to keep in mind that in historical comparative linguistics, all that matters is the regularity of sound meaning correspondences. The comparative method is designed to eliminate chance as an explanation for the patterns, normally I would say, that we see in the data sets, right? So, and this is a screenshot from the page. So Michael responds, a major problem is that Bantu is a subfamily of a subfamily of a subfamily of Niger-Congo. Suppose your conclusion is correct. How to integrate Indo-European into Niger-Congo, which reaches much deeper in the past? So my response is, there is no such thing as Niger-Congo phylum. If there is, can you please show me any text where Niger-Congo has been confirmed via the comparative method? The same for Afroasiatic, Khoisan, or Nilo-Saharan. Can you show me valid reconstructions for Niger-Congo that can confirm the alleged subdivisions of the phylum? And pay attention to his response. He says, I am one of those Africanists who strongly believe that there will be such reconstructions in the future. In my opinion, there must be bottom-up reconstructions of smaller subfamilies, and this will take much time, but I am confident that we will be successful. And so this is 2020. This isn't some old writings from the 60s, 70s, or 80s. And so what he's admitting here is that there is no validation for Niger-Congo. And we can do the same for Nilo-Saharan or Afroasiatic, because these linguistic groups, I mean, language families are built on the proof of the regularity of sound meaning correspondences. Without doing that research, you have a hypothesis. And so what he's admitting here is that, no, we don't have that information, but I am confident, I believe, I have faith in our Lord Jesus Christ of Niger-Congo that we will have that information one day. So he pulled an Obama and having hope in the future for this evidence. It's possible that it may come, but the point being made here is that it doesn't exist now. And so for all these folks who are sitting here trying to argue against a Egyptian and Bantu relationship are doing so in part because they believe that Egyptian belongs to a different language family, which is really a phylum called Afroasiatic, and that Niger-Congo is something totally different and separate. And we're seeing proof right here in a live conversation in real time that this stuff doesn't exist. These are myths. And it is based on religious faith that they even continue to use these labels. And so you would also have to understand the scientific process in terms of the comparative method and things of that nature. But it's this type of stuff that we come across all the time when we're dealing with these European scholars. And so you don't be afraid of engaging these people when you are properly armed with proper methodology and a sense of history and evolution in the field. And so this is, you know, what I wanted to, you know, point out, you know, as far as that is concerned. So our last panelist, if I'm saying this correctly, or if incorrectly, please forgive me, but Shakara.
Greetings, it's Shakara.
Shakara,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, it's a slight different emphasis on the A's.
Right.
But yeah, first of all, greetings from London, UK.
Peace, peace.
And I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. I'm going to look up that letter. I am familiar with Baba Bilongo, but unfortunately the language barrier keeps me from accessing much of his work. So I appreciate, but whilst I'm resolving and solving that problem, I do appreciate the time that you've taken to kind of share this particular letter. I was moved to kind of join the panel based upon you opening for contributions and insights into what you have delivered, and I think that the importance of what you have shared is infinite in its scope. And so permit me for a short moment just to expound on what I believe, or what I see as the political implications of what you have shared, if I may.
No problem. Go ahead.
Because for me, the whiteout on African-centered scholarship is really a part of the agenda of ensuring a lack of validity in a functional identity of African among Black people around the world. Because as you have outlined, they focus on, you know, the relationship between Africa and people outside of Africa for the purpose of decentralizing African people. And it just so happens that in this day and age, especially growing up in London and being exposed to Africans from all across the African diaspora, you get to realize and understand the extent to which many of us are still victims of the definitions provided for us by European anthropologists. And nobody, as far as Africans in the diaspora, is free of this imposition. Africans on the continent, Africans throughout the Americas, from where my family is from, Africans in the UK, throughout Europe, yeah? And so very much the definitions that we use to define ourselves, even down to terminologies like tribe, are the result of European anthropologists. And so in recent years, we have had the development of a number of religious and political movements that seek to or presume to negate the identity of African. And the purpose of this, as far as I'm concerned, is to neutralize the potential political impact of people organizing around said identity. And so the attempt is to make Africanness unscientific and not even dysfunctional, but unfunctional. Yeah, i.e., having no function. In relation to the fact that if we do build upon the works of our ancestors and elders like Baba Sheikh Anta Diop and Baba Phyla Benga and Mama Marimba Ani, etc., what they were trying to do was not just get us to feel proud about being African, but develop functional paradigms for us to reconstruct African civilization through thought, culture, and all of the necessary outcomes of both of those endeavors, including language, including ceremonies, including spirituality, and so on and so forth. And so I'm really just emphasizing the fact that the African-centered scholar has a key role in that agenda. And Baba Bilongo, Baba Abenga, Baba Mboli, and others, because they are doing the work of relating Africa to itself, yeah, in terms of whereby they have put the white supremacist has put forward an agenda of separating Africans from each other. This is the danger of works like the works that you are doing at the moment. So I just want to share that there are those of us who, as secondary researchers in this field get a lot from what it is that you're putting out, and will ensure that more among our brothers and sisters are able to develop this as a functional reality within our minds and in terms of how we relate to each other. Also, you know what I mean? As Mama Marimba Ali says, all aspects of white supremacy work in the interest of white supremacy. And so it's just about us making sure that we have African-centered scholarship that is working in the interest of African liberation. So once again, give thanks for the presentation.
Respect. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's an ongoing battle, and you know, the layperson doesn't see often what's going on behind the scenes, and you know, until they engage those individuals who are you know, in those different types of struggles, in every layer of academic and political endeavor, they just won't know. And you know, some of this stuff has been written on in certain texts. You know, they give, you know, the testimony of their struggles, and you know, but we, you know, there seems to be this culture of not wanting to read anymore, just looking at old YouTube videos, you know, and counting that as part of the scholarship. And so I'm seeing, for example, our brother Sheffrin asked something earlier, or made a comment earlier, that Christopher Ehret, you know, confirmed everything using the proper method. No, he did not. And I want to use this as an opportunity to kind of promote I don't know the exact dates in April just yet, but in April, I'm going to do a 3-part series on why Afro-Asiatic is not a valid language construct. And so part 1 is going to deal with what is science, or ask the question of what is science and how does science work. So it's just, in order to understand this whole debate, you have to be well grounded in the principles of science and how scientific experiments are actually done. So in part 2, it is going to be the historical comparative method. What is it, and how is it worked out, in essence? So you're going to get a good full lesson on the historical comparative method. And then we're going to deal in part 3 specifically with Afro-Asiatic. And we're going to show that how these Africanist researchers come to their conclusions regarding Afro-Asiatic from earlier periods even to modern periods is the same. And so we got to remember that Christopher Ehret is taught by Greenberg. Christopher Ehret teaches his students the same. You know, my professor, Dr. Karen Kleiman, when she was teaching me these 2 courses in African history and culture, she, you know, used the Greenberg method. My one of my other teachers, Dr. G.J.K. Campbell Dunn, he taught using the Greenberg method. I'm very familiar with Greenberg's method as in terms of practice. If you look at some of my earliest works, it was based on Greenberg, because that's the school I came from. And so once I started learning this other way, the real way, that's when all of this changed. And so in that 3rd one, we're going to address Afro-Asiatic directly. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time just giving you citations about other scholars saying that it is wrong, because now we're just getting into he say, she say. And so, you know, where I'm from, demonstration beats conversation. So we're going to go through some things in terms of the conclusions of Afro-Asiatic and some of these texts, and show why they have not used the comparative method.
I just want to make a comment about that. That may help the listeners. Because I seen this comment earlier today, and I just seen the brother Sheffer make it in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically what's being argued now is that Greenberg is now out of the blue, there's an admission that Greenberg's method was faulty. But to save face for Greenberg's method, now all of a sudden people came after Greenberg and proved his conclusions. The conclusions Greenberg came with, which are the 4 language phyla.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's being said that people came after him and applied the correct method and came to the same conclusion, and that's completely false. And so here's how the logic works. And I was saying in the chat that if you if you use the math principle of PEMDAS, which is the order of operations, if you give an algebraic problem to someone who has to apply PEMDAS to it, that's the only way you're gonna come to a correct answer. If you use those orders of operations out of order, you're not going to come away with the correct answer. So what this is saying is that if Greenberg did not use the correct methodology and his outcome is what it was, those 4 language phyla, what people are saying is that someone came afterwards and used the correct order of operations and came with the same conclusion, and that's not even possible.
Exactly.
So it's the same thing with PEMDAS, and if people don't remember what PEMDAS or PEMDAS is from school, is you perform parentheses of first, exponents, multiplication and division, then addition and subtraction from left to right, etc. And so if you're given a formula, that's the only way you'll come away with a correct answer. And I wish I had a quick example to show, because visuals are better. But think about that when you hear people make those claims.
Yeah, I would love to see this text where Christopher Ehret started from scratch and used the historical comparative method and then came up with the same data as Greenberg in terms of his conclusion with the same languages that are, because Christopher Ehret hasn't changed anything. And so in Christopher Ehret's Afro-Asiatic, it still involves the languages Egyptian, Berber, Semitic, Chadic, and Cushitic.
Right.
Those are the same ones that Greenberg came up with. They changed nothing. His method did not change at all. The same method used in Nilo-Saharan, the same method is used in Niger-Congo, and we just read from an Africanist in Niger-Congo. He just told you that there is no that they didn't use a comparative method in Niger-Congo to validate the construct. This is in 2020, and I will show some other scholars admitting that Niger-Congo, for example, was not built using the historical comparative method. And so the problem is that in computer science we have this saying: trash in, trash out. And so what Jawa was alluding to is that your methodology cannot be wrong and then you come to a right conclusion. You're wrong, period. And so you're not going to get the same outcome because the massive comparative method is used to answer a different type of question. And so this is what people don't even understand about the whole phylum versus family situation. And so all of that is going to be explained. And so I'm going to explain it well enough that the lay persons can get it. And so I won't be taking any, questions. I won't be taking, having any panel members. I'm just going to spend an hour and a half. And these are going to be 3 consecutive days. So if I decide to do it on Tuesday, we'll start it off on a Tuesday. It'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Now it will be Friday. So I'm gonna have that whole week, that evening, whatever week that I choose, that Friday, I will have an open discussion with anybody who wants to join the panel or whatnot, and we can talk about what was discussed in the previous 3 days. And so we will see, because a lot of this back and forth going on, and nobody demonstrates anything. So of course, being the mature one in these conversations, we're going to show you why demonstration beats conversation. Because doing linguistics is not like if I have to try to discover the Higgs boson. Because with the Higgs boson, I would need a large hadron collider in order to do that experiment. You don't need that in linguistics. I can work out the problems right in front of your face, because linguistics is not science, it is mathematics. And so all of that will be explained. And so when you understand that it's mathematics, you work out linguistic problems like a regular math problem. And that's why you show your work. I can look at your text right then and there and tell you if someone validated their argument or not. I don't need to go and get an approval from whatever scholar, Julie, Susie, or anything to that nature. I don't need to go and dig and do an archaeological dig over here and find a bone and do any DNA tests or any of that. Any linguistic argument we can settle right there on the page. And so, and he said, Hassan made a comment or asked a question, why did Obinga reject Berber, yet his Mboli kept it, his student kept it? Well, for one, Obinga doesn't reject Berber. He just makes Berber its own language family. So for Obinga, there's 3 language families in Africa: Khoisan, Negro Egyptian, and Berber. So he takes out Berber from the whole Afroasiatic, because Afroasiatic is not a valid construct. And so, he keeps the other families together in terms of Cushitic, in terms of Chadic, and he includes that in his Negro Egyptian. It's Semitic that is separated and taken out of the African languages because it was not born in Africa. It was born in the Middle East. And so Christopher Ehret, some years later, agrees and writes an article stating that, what Obinga had already said. But of course, Christopher Ehret is still in his Afroasiatic paradigm. So
here's the book here. No, the brother. So whoever asked the question, you need to get this book by Obinga. He explains it. Hold on. Yeah. In his Origin Community de l'Égyptien ancient du Conte et des Langues Negro African Moderne. So that is the common origin of ancient Egyptian and Coptic and modern Black African languages. So Obinga explains it in his work. Right.
Not only that, is it possible for you to show like the back of the chapter where he outlines, he gives the graph for Negro Egyptian for his version?
Yeah, I know exactly what's that.
See, this is what I'm talking about. People just making up arguments and don't read the text. And I'm not, saying, anything about anyone in the chat. I'm just saying in general, you hear stuff from other people, but those people have never read the text at all. So they start making just silly arguments like
here's the table right here. So
yeah,
pardon the light above, but
so you really can't see it, but these are his language. So on the far left, you see Egyptian, and then you see Cushitic, and then you see what is that? Chadic? What is that? Yeah, Chadic, and then this one should be Nilo-Saharan, and then Niger Cordophonion, which is Niger Congo. So he groups all of those things into Negro Egyptian. Berber, like I think it's on the next page, maybe.
Yeah. Hold on.
Yes, it's in French, Brother Hassan.
So sub-Arabic. Okay, so Proto-Berber. So
So Berber is its own language family. And then Khoisan is its own language family. So you see he separates them right there. So it's not that he doesn't. Obinga counts Berber as an African language. And so he's saying that there's 3 indigenous African languages: Berber, Negro Egyptian, and Khoisan. And so, you know, like Chief X would kept asking this question, well, why did Obinga turn Afro-Asiatic into Negro Egyptian? That never happened, you know, and whoever was feeding him that information, I can guarantee you they never read Obinga's book. They just made up these arguments. So this is why it's important to read the text for yourself. And so I encourage everyone, you know, put your political bias behind and start learning French and start reading these French these French authors, or these French speaking authors, I should say. Because when you start learning these various languages, a whole array of scholarship opens up to you. And you'll see what is really going on. And like, you won't even pay attention to these YouTube you know, wannabe trolls who don't read text but always have something to say about fields and stuff that they don't know. They haven't read this stuff. And so I'll end my rant on that. Let me see. They're just having conversations to themselves in the chat. Anybody else have something to say? Emiket, Ujaru, Shakara, or Shakara, I should say.
I do. I just want to, like I said, I like to show a visual. So I just want to show and just ask your audience to solve these 2 quick problems right here. The first one and the second one. So I you know, I know there's a delay, so I don't want to have this awkward silence, but I want people in the chat to solve these 2 problems. If I had time, I would make more, but you know, I just want to drive a point home with concerning method and how as you mentioned, trash in, trash out. And see, in argumentation theory or in debating, we say something similar, as in you never acquiesce to a faulty premise, because if you do, you will always reach a faulty conclusion. And so you never acquiesce to a faulty premise, which means trash. The trash in is going to produce trash coming out. And so there's no way around that. And so you can't have trash coming in and then expect the same outcome as if you clean up the trash and then perform the same work. So I see Amber has 24 for the first one, and I'm assuming 20 for the second one. And if that first Donnie has 32 and 20, and that's correct. Okay, so I just, you know, I don't want to long this out. So Donnie C is correct with 32 and 20. So the first one is 32. The next one is 20. Now, in order for you to get that correct answer, you have to follow a method. No way around it. So just to explain it, obviously you have to do what's in parentheses first. So the first one, you have to add 5 and 3, which gives you 8. Now you have 4 multiplied by 8, and that gives you 32. But let's say you multiply 4 times 5 first. And so you have 20. 4 times 5 is 20. And then you add the 3, that'll give you 23. Guess what? That would be incorrect. Okay, so, and then for the second one, you have to do exponents first. All right, which is the superscripted 2. So 2 to 2 squared, basically that's what that's saying, is 4. So you have to do that first to produce the 4. Now you multiply 5 times 4, which gives you 20. But let's say you multiply 5 times 2 first, which is 10, and then squared it. That would give you 100. And that would be the incorrect answer. All right. So and it's PEMDAS, right? The watcher, PEMDAS. This is what we all learn in math. So I just wanted to drive that point home about method and the importance of method and linguistics in general, but especially the historical comparative method, as Asar, as you said, is math. So it deals with logic. And so that's all I wanted to make sure people see.
I'm keep that up for a moment and just add that, you know, as to keep the analogy going, what Greenberg did is he added or he went 4 times 5 and then added 3. So that would have been 20 plus 3. And so what Sheffron is trying to argue is that Christopher Eric came afterwards and then added 5 plus 3 in the parentheses and then multiplied it times 4 and got the same answer as Greenberg with his answer. And that's impossible. It's logically impossible. And so this is why I know for a fact that you haven't read Christopher Eric's work and you don't know how this is done. And so like this is why it's important to have these type of discussions and demonstrations. So we have Brother Wujawu.
No.
I'm sorry.
No, here I just want to show. Here's the work here of Christopher Eric, where he makes the attempt. So this is 1995 work right here. Reconstructing Proto-Afro-Asiatic, or Proto-Afrasian. Vowels, tones, consonants, and vocabulary by Christopher Eric. So you need to, if you want to understand and look at his so-called data, you need to have this work. So
you could just open up to any random page, and if you can bring it close, I can show you why, you know, how this is not the comparative method. You can just open up any page. So you'll see, it's going to be kind of hard to see, but you know, I'm a request of our good brother, because I don't have my book with me here in Texas. It's still in Philly. So I'll have him just give a random page, but you can see how he's doing his comparisons here. So he has Omotic, he has Chadic, he has Cushitic, he has Egyptian, and then he has Semitic. And so what he's doing is he's comparing Proto-Semitic to Egyptian to Proto-Cushitic to Proto-Chadic to Proto-Omotic. And so he's calculating these proto-reconstructions together to create another reconstruction over here on this far left, which is supposed to be the Proto-Afro-Asiatic on the left. And so for anyone who knows about the historical comparative method, this is not it at all, because you don't compare reconstructions to reconstructions to reconstructions to create another reconstruction. And so we can show you this. So when I do my second part of the installment, you'll see how the comparative method is done. And once you see that, and then I show you how Greenberg and how Christopher Eric and how Roger Blinch and a whole host of these other scholars have done when trying to compare these languages, they have not validated. They are doing our equivalent to what, let's go back to Wujawu's screen, you know, of these order of operations in terms of the methods. So when people are talking about Mboli, they don't understand how it works. Mboli does the comparative method. He does the correct order of operations. Greenberg, Christopher Eric, none of them do that. They may do it on some smaller scale languages, but never in terms, they've never reconstructed a family. And so we'll get into the difference between a family and a phylum and all of this other kind of stuff. And so we don't run from none of this. We're able to demonstrate this stuff on the fly. And so
just to like when you followed up with your analogy there's no way that Greenberg can do what is shown in the red, and then somebody else comes away and do what we show in the green, and have a matching result.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what the brother Sheffrin, if you're still listening, that's the essence of what you're saying. So I just wanted to demonstrate, because demonstration beats conversation, is that that's logically impossible. All right. So doing a correct method and having a result, and then doing an incorrect method applied to the same problem and having a matching result is logically impossible. As you can see on the screen, 32 is not 23. Now you may have some people out there, pseudo land, may say, well, 23 is the reverse of 32. See, he got it right.
You know, you just add the missing component, you know, via, you know, the Akashic records. That's where it's stored. You just got to add that into to get the correct. Like, that's how, you know, some of them. And so that's why, like, when I make that citation from Dixon, where they compare Greenberg's methods to astrology, they're saying it's unscientific. And so, you know, people gotta, you know, quit jumping out of the window thinking that everything that black folks are saying is incorrect without doing the actual work themselves. And so this is why we have these conversations, and this is why, you know, we don't spend too much time entertaining the trolls who we know refuse to read in real life. And so, you know, for those of us in the United States who will probably be on quarantine for a couple of weeks, take this opportunity. You know, I'm not saying this, you know, I appreciate, you know, book sales and stuff to that nature, but that's not the primary motivation for me writing. Get the book, read it, and check for yourself. Get Mubabinge's book, Learn French. As I mentioned earlier, I have the Pimsleur's French levels 1, 2, and 3. So it's no reading, it's just MP3 files. You just there's 30 of them or 31 of them in each folder. So every day for 3 months, for 30 minutes, just practice French. And, you know, by the summertime, we could start a book club. We'll all read and bully together. You know, and so you can get a sense of what is going on here. And that's what you just got to do. So y'all can hit me up on my email, info@asarmhotep.com, if y'all serious. And I will upload it somewhere, and I'll give you the link so you can download it. And if you're serious, because it'll take a while for them to try to translate 630 pages into English, you know, for them. So in less time than it would take for someone to translate it into English, you can learn French and read it yourself. You know, so I'm just we're already on 3 hours, so I don't want to make this show too long. So I'm gonna give everyone, you know, a couple of minutes to say, you know, last words. So I will start with Shakara, then I'll go to Wujawu, then we'll go to Emiket. Well, for 2, they came back on, and so we'll probably end with him.
Yeah, greetings, bro. I don't really have a comment, more of a question, and
Okay.
it's a bit of an obvious one. So I was in and out. So forgive me if you addressed this before.
Okay.
But one of the things that occurs to me when you were doing the presentation and giving some of the questions and some of your statements now is that everybody ain't gonna study comparative linguistics, but what makes you know, what makes it difficult for us to cross the barrier in terms of understanding where some of our scholars are coming from is because of the weight of institutional power that is behind Eurocentric scholarship. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether their scholarship is accurate or not, it is functional within the system that we exist in. So what is it that we need to do? It occurs to me that really and truly our own symposiums should be sufficient, should be a source of power. And probably the biggest one that we have at the moment is ASCAC. in that regard. And big up ASCAP, because I remember when they came to London in the 90s and had the conference over here. I was there, so we give thanks. But what is it, in your opinion, that we need to do to institutionalize more the African-centered scholarship and research, and disseminate it more so that it becomes functional among our people, so that even those of us who are not studying comparative linguistics have an intuitive, let's say, understanding of it, in the same way now that we have intuitive understandings, even though it's inaccurate, of concepts like Afro-Asiatic. Even if we don't know the science behind it, we understand intuitively what that means. So it occurs to me that we need to get to that level. So what is it that you believe that we need to do that?
Well, two things. First and foremost, as I just said, learn French. If you really want to get busy, learn German. But, French, I think, is easier to learn than German, even though our English allegedly, well, it's not even allegedly, it comes from the same family. But, most of our words in English come from Latin or Greek. And French. So Latin, Greek, and French. And so you'll actually be surprised at how many words you speak in English that are actually French. So to do that, so that's on just us as individuals, so we can access these texts. Because, for example, if you were to get in Bowley's text, it is actually a textbook on how to do the historical comparative method. So you solve that one problem by reading his text or reading Mubabinge's text, etc. But even still, there's still going to be a large learning curve. So just if you're serious about linguistics, just take some entry. Like, I teach a very basic intro to linguistics course on my website. And then you would have to get bored, but that would get you enough that you will know the basics, to where when you're reading literature on linguistics, you can follow it a lot easier. But on the side of the scholars, what we have to do is to publish more, in terms of, especially for us English speaking folks, solid text on these subjects. And two, just as you said, we need to put on our own conferences. Like, I was looking for a number of conferences to present at for Egyptology. And it's interesting that damn near all of the conferences on Egyptology happen in Europe. There's only a few that happen even here in the United States, but there's none that happens on the continent of Africa, and outside of Egypt itself, which should be a given. But in terms of African countries, it's none dedicated, to that being the focus, and then publishing the proceedings from those conferences. And so we are going to have to, Theophilo Binga has already created a journal, and which is the UNC journal that you can see online, but they have a physical book that you can order. But again, if you don't speak French, you probably wouldn't understand the website to purchase this stuff. So we need at least a good English version of our own journals that is accessible to the public. Just how Ivan Van Cernova, we look at them as books, but those are actually journals. Like on Cheikh Anta Diop, Blacks in Science, and stuff to this nature. Those are journals. So we need to create more journals like that are sold in, either on Amazon, on a specific website itself, dedicated to it, that we can put these ideas out there. And that they're constantly being updated. So if you have, for example, a conference on African Egyptology, then you publish, some of the best articles and things from that, peer review it, and publish it in these special journals or whatnot, then, and make it accessible to the public. That is going to help in that. And then, even doing quality videos on YouTube explaining these concepts, So I try to do as best as I can with these presentations, but my aim, I can't show my camera, but my camera is back here, to utilize my camera to start making mini documentaries, on these different facets. So it could be visually acceptable, to the lay public, and to present some real deep information that, kind of makes them hungry, saying, for some deeper information, and to lead them in that way. So I think it's a combination of things that must be done, in both of our directions. So, as lay persons and students ourselves, we have to have a certain hunger for knowledge. And if it's not readily available in front of us, that shouldn't stop us from seeking it out. Because I guarantee you, when you start looking, you'll find it. That's what happened to me. And so, so if you have a deep desire for knowledge, just go out there and get it. And for those who produce knowledge, we need to find more creative ways to get this stuff out to our people. And so that includes writing the text, creating journals, putting on conferences, and making visual media, of our thing. So we need more Dr. Mayats, with the cartoons and stuff that she does, and other folks. So they got some bad, kind of animations going on. So what we need is for all of y'all, everybody doesn't have to do the same thing. Like, I'm into media, Wujawu's into media and graphics. Like, we can take our skills in that and create some good visuals for the folks. But, but we also happen to be scholars, and so we can produce the knowledge at the same time. But all of y'all don't have to be producers of knowledge. Just study science and how and research methodology and how to evaluate text. And if something meets your standard, once you've obtained those that skill set, if you are a visual artist, a musician, for example, or a film director, and a clothing, y'all hook up and create things that these stories can be told in unique ways. And so there's plenty of ways in which we can do this. We just got to be more vigilant and creative and bold, and be bold enough to stand in our own traditions and not be ashamed. But arm yourself with proper methodology so that anyone comes sideways and try to devalue the African contribution to Africana studies and things of that nature, that we can challenge them, without any hitch in the movement. So I hope my long, wide response answered your question.
Yes, it did. Give thanks. Much appreciated.
All right. Who was next? Brother Wujawu?
Yes. Yeah, I just close with again, excellent presentation, a much needed topic for discussion, and hopefully this doesn't stop this discussion. Hopefully we can revisit it in the near future after it sinks in and people will listen and hear what you had to say about it and see the importance of it. And I just think it's a very important topic, especially in our social communities, where we tend to rely on, it actually comes down, like, basically hearing what you were saying, seeing what goes on in the social community. There's an issue of appeal to authority, a logical fallacy appeal to authority, because it's not only are people asking for other, they're forsaking the agency of Africans and African scholarship, people who are born and raised in African countries, but they're also trying to argue. They're trying to debate and argue a position, and that's where you have logical fallacies come into play. And so I think that maybe in a future conversation, we can kind of talk about that within the context of this conversation. So I just hope that people listen and be inspired to kind of change their trend of thought and get ready to put in some work. And just on Shakara's question, I would like to add that not everybody's going to study. And so for those people who are not going to study, because it's gonna take a person who has a desire and an interest in a topic to really grasp it. And so what I would hope for people to cut down on or eliminate is that if you're not focused, or if you don't have a desire to learn something, then at least have the respect for the discipline or the study to be cautious and not try to argue about it, because then you'll be guilty of arguing out of ignorance. And so not everybody's going to be interested in these topics, and then not everybody's going to have the time to and dedication and discipline to actually study enough to know when they can even be wrong. And like Neil deGrasse Tyson says, he says a lot of people study just enough to know when they're right, but not enough to know when they're wrong. So hopefully that will change. But that's all I have.
All right. Sister Emiket.
Yeah, so I would just like to finish by emphasizing on the presentation that you gave, and just to because what I really took from it is and I think what people miss a lot is just how much qualifications African scholars, whether it's Africans in the continent or Africans in the diaspora, have to have just to compete with other scholars, or even just to to be considered worthy of something. And when most people talk about which white scholar or which European scholars have validated your information or so and so's information, I would just like to tell people that the focus is really on we're putting a focus on something really wrong, because instead of focusing on what European validates, we're supposed to be actually focusing on the scholars' qualifications and things of that nature. Because even on what you presented, you could see Bilolo's qualifications, and they were just grand. And I know you did a post somewhere before I saw where a different African scholar that was just way overqualified. And these are people that most of us would not even be aware of, that you've presented to people in the hopes that people would actually learn from that, and actually people aspire to be on that particular level, or as opposed to which scholar agreed with this, or what is the consensus on this and that, or what does which academia agrees with this and that, knowing very well that most of these European scholars are not well studied in African languages. And it's only up until recently that we have people who focus on African languages and linguistics. So logic would tell you that most of those people are not even qualified, to actually speak on this. So even asking that question is really stupid. I mean, I don't have any other word for it, but I just wanted people to really emphasize on or focus on if they don't take anything else from this presentation, they should take just to understand how much of the qualifications these African scholars really have, because they are the authority, even if they were not Africans, just on their qualifications alone, they would, if they were white, black, green, it doesn't matter. The qualifications that they have would put them as authority. But they are also in the center talking about their traditions and all of that. That already puts them as well. So they are like 360 degrees. They are holistically qualified to speak on these matters. And then people just push that aside. They don't even see that at all. They don't even ask, instead of saying your friends, they don't even know what are your qualifications of your friends, or quote unquote, but they would take another white scholar's opinion without even knowing what is it. Have they demonstrated that particular work? Even though they haven't demonstrated it, just because they're white, they're on Wikipedia talking about this and that, that's good enough. And then just completely ignoring qualified people speaking on matters, and especially new findings, because we have to understand that these are new findings, because it's only up until recently that African scholars are actually focusing on this particular stuff that other people have never even, taken that time to do. So I just want people to just, at least go away with that, and that is the level that we need to be on, pretty much.
I appreciate your comments. And lastly, we have Brother Ifatunde. Not the Dr. Umar Johnson Ifatunde. So this is a different Ifatunde.
Yeah, Ifatunde Fayemi.
Speak your speech.
Speak your speech.
Right.
But
go ahead.
And I think that in addition to with our sister Imiket mentioned, we also have to take into account those of us who are initiated in African tradition, and that we experience ceremony and ritual. So there are things that we're going to be able to, in addition to those on the continent and other places, we experience these things. So it's not just we're studying from a what am I going to call it, a psychological distance. Not only do we research these things, but we can add experience to it. And there are, nuances and details that we'll be able to perceive that someone on the outside will not be able to perceive. And I think that should definitely be a part of a conversation as well. When we have these other people making these comments, I have not seen or heard of any one of these people actually being initiated, at least in any African traditional system, be it West Africa or any other place in Africa. Because if you were, then you would see these things in ritual. If you're looking at the rituals as seen in the walls, or you're learning proverbs through oral tradition, and you're actually reading Kemetic text, wisdom text, the Sabayit, etc., or anything from the book of Coming Forth by Day, or the book of Vindication, otherwise called the Coffin text, etc., you would begin to recognize these things just right off the bat with little to no effort. So I would definitely encourage people to, seek out an African tradition that's still being practiced, an unbroken tradition. And if you were to understand Kemet, this is one of the richest ways in which we can make identifications, etc. So Bujal, he took the quote I was going to give. So of our dear brother, Tyson DeGrasse, that people will know just enough to think they're right, but not enough to know when they're wrong. I'll give another quote, actually by an Asian, Confucius, otherwise Confucius. And I have to paraphrase it. Those who think that it cannot be done should not interrupt those who are doing it.
All right. So thank you all, and thanks to Sister Naya, and thanks to Sister Jolanda for them coming on earlier, and everyone for being in the chat room, and those who are listening live who are not in the chat room but are watching, saying this presentation. So I appreciate all of you, everyone who made a contribution, a donation from earlier. Special thanks and shout out to you. And we'll continue this conversation. So I'm actually going to do another live sometime this weekend, probably Friday, and we're going to talk about Mbog and Ma'at. So Ma'at in Cameroon and how that looks like. And so this is something that I discuss in Alluja Volume 2. So, we'll continue. So this was actually just kind of a last minute thing that I wanted to have, because I normally don't do shows on Mondays. But So I appreciate you all coming out at last minute and joining the conversation. So keep the conversation going in your own circles, in your own families, and take this time besides quarantine and chill with Netflix to read some literature. It don't have to be my literature or anyone on the squads, but just read something, get studied up on something. And so, and I just quickly received this book in the mail today, which is from Dr. Melba Velez Ortiz, Ma'atian Ethics in Communication Context. She's a professor in communication ethics at Great Valley University in Michigan. And I caught her, was made aware of her around the kind of near the completion of her book. She was trying to get some information on Ma'at. And so she got an early copy, you know, of the text. And so there's some drawing of ideas and concepts from Elijah Volume 2 in this text, but she's drawing from a wide variety of sources, as you can see in it. It's a thin book, but it's a quality thin book. So it's Routledge Academic Press, Routledge Focus, and so this is Dr. Ortiz, Puerto Rican woman from Puerto Rico, literally from Puerto Rico. So anyway, so if you don't have this book, I guess I recommend this book, Modern Ethics in Communication Context, or get Brother, what's his name book? Brother Garfield. I forgot the title of it, but if y'all know Brother Garfield, you know he's been advertising his book. So they've been on pre-orders, and so it's coming up to that time. Well, I don't know if he's going to release the book since the debate has been postponed. So I wonder how that's going to happen. But either way it goes, holla at your boy Garfield. So even if he's not releasing it on the 22nd like he was, you can still pre-order the book, and we'll see what he's going to do regarding that particular text. But anyway, love you all. See y'all this weekend. Oh, we're going to have a conversation on the Amara Squad channel. Brother Sanjetti, Brother Wujawu, and I. And it's titled The Gods of Atheism, I believe. And Wujawu, tell them about it.
Yes, The Gods of Atheism. That's upcoming discussion we're gonna have. And yeah, it's gonna be tentatively Saturday. So keep your Saturday evening a little free-ish. So we'll be putting the link to set, so you can set your notification up and be notified for it. But yeah, The Gods of Atheism. We're gonna clarify atheism, and all of that good stuff. But bring your pen and pad, or bring your tablet, laptop, notebook. So it's gonna be that kind of conversation. Hopefully you have some takeaways from the conversation. All right.
All right.
Yeah, we're going to come with a lot of good information, good questions. We're going to be discussing some history. We're going to bring the text. We always bring the text, and at the core of everything, we come from the African-centered perspective. So make sure y'all be there.
Yeah, man. So again, saying goodbye for the 40th time tonight. Y'all be safe in y'all quarantine homes, and we'll see y'all later on this week. So rest up and study up. We'll see you later. Peace.